This story begins with the crowd that came and shouted with lit torches in hand that the witch needed to be burned already. After all, it was thanks to her that absolutely all the barns burned down. Now it would be very difficult for the entire village to survive. At that moment, the man was leading the redhead in front of everyone to the place of her future and immutable death. But in a moment, a girl shouted. She asked them to stop and not burn the girl. Circinia was a noble and pleasant 20-year-old young woman. She hadn't committed a single bad deed. This tale told the story of a simpleton who by chance became the crown heir's fiancé. And one day, a girl woke up in the body of Circinia, who was the villain and the protagonist. Initially, the girl was a sorceress from the Belfar Empire who had the ability to control fire. Using her sinister abilities, Circinia could easily accumulate and release heat, making her invincible. In addition to all the atrocities she committed, the girl disfigured her mother and also managed to burn half of the empire. Furthermore, she tried to kidnap and kill one of the heirs of an important family. However, the prince managed to thwart all the nefarious plans and survive, which led Circinia to the death penalty. As she could not resist her vicious nature, she suffered a terrible death. This death was one of the attempts to show the power of the great heir, who finally found his happiness. When the girl first found herself in Circinia's body, she was very afraid that her fate would be terrible. But be it good or bad, it happened 3 years before the start of this story, which meant a chance to change fate. If the girl had stayed hidden and stopped her atrocities, she most likely would have been able to save her head. Furthermore, if they had decided to burn the girl at the stake, she would have survived. Because he didn't scare her at all. When everyone starts to exaggerate, Circinia should just add more oil to it, ultimately avoiding exaggeration. The people, upon seeing the clouds of ash, would begin to assume that the redhead girl would simply burn to the ground. In the end, everything turned out exactly as she expected. The crowd was going to light a fire for cinema. But suddenly, an unknown guy approached riding his marvelous horse, thus diverting all attention to himself. The witch did not understand who this guy was, and then became sad about the suddenness of the whole situation. The tall boy stood in front of her, after which he affectionately announced that he would now release the girl. At that moment, he released Circinia's hands and gently brought one to her face, after which he kissed her. Looking into the boy's eyes, the witch realized that he looked completely familiar to her, which made her unable to move him away from her. Circinia swore to herself that she had smelled this scent before, which is why it felt familiar. And in a moment, it occurred to her that this boy was most likely her Ben, although he was completely different from what he had been before. At that moment, the boy said that he missed his Circinia very much, and that was why he was looking for her. Previously, the redhead was a gambling fanatic and queen, where she very often won the jackpot. Everyone who saw her win considered the girl magnificent and very often wanted to ask her how she managed to win so many times. They were also interested to know if Circinia felt rich having so many chips. But the witch understood perfectly that she should quit gambling because it had become an addiction for her. The girl was starting to go crazy. That is probably why she won so many times in a row. At that moment, the ball landed again in the cell with the number 16, which meant another victory. The witch got up from the table and shouted happily that she had managed to win again. She was well aware of the fact that she could finally get rid of the life of an evil witch and start living like an ordinary person. It turned out that the girl fell into Circinia's body at night when she fell asleep after reading the book. And when she woke up, the girl was already in the body of a wonderful, fire-red-haired witch. She possessed not only a charming appearance, but also terrifying fire powers. Circinia was one of the most cold-blooded people, and was not afraid of fire either due to her abilities. But besides that, not a single person saw the other side of the fiery girl, where there was only loneliness. The girl was a villain whom everyone only wanted dead, and in the end, they got their wish. When the girl found herself in the body, she thought that the end of her life was coming now, which almost drove her crazy. But here more than 4 years have passed since the story itself, but everything was going well for Circinia. Until a moment, absolutely no one knew that the redhead was a potential witch. She believed that such sudden changes happened thanks to God's will. As a result, the girl decided that she must start living alone and also receive money carelessly. If Circinia became rich, she could avoid the original end of her life and consequently live much longer. When the girl was informed that the gambling club had no money at that moment, she was a little surprised. The servant politely replied to Circinia that the club was currently in a difficult situation. He also added that the count should return soon, after which the girl could speak with him. At that moment, the witch said that it would be better if no one refused to pay her winnings. The guy told the girl again that they couldn't do this for the time being, after which Circinia broke one of the chips. After which she abruptly started breaking the table, the girl lost her temper and shouted for them to return the money. The witch understood that it wouldn't take long to transfer the money, although she told herself it might take a week. Previously, the girl could not have done something like this because of people's reactions. But now nothing was stopping her. Suddenly, the guy told the girl that he could give her a small collateral, especially for her. After walking with him for a while, Circinia asked him again what the collateral in question was. Suddenly, she saw in front of her a fearfully huddled boy sitting in a dark room in the deepest corner. It turned out that this guy was recently enslaved, and at a very decent price due to his age. Hearing these words, Circinia suggested that the count might have deliberately taken the boy as a slave. The assistant told the girl to trust him, and that this guy was worth a lot to him. At that moment, the girl became enraged because he had previously said that the count had absolutely no money at that time. Circinia was aware of the level of her anger, so she tried to calm down to avoid making past mistakes. It was necessary to calm down so as not to set this casino on fire prematurely. The worker asked the girl to remain calm, because the count would definitely pay everything after some time. At that moment, the boy was still sitting in a corner, but slowly began to squeal that he needed help. Circinia calmed down and realized that now she had to think much more radically than usual to save money. As she looked at the boy, she realized the fact that he was full of bruises and scratches. Moreover, his body was completely emaciated. Most likely he hadn't eaten for a long, long time. The boy flinched when he realized that the witch had finally approached him, and he was very scared. Suddenly, Circinia carefully extended her hand to him and asked the boy to look at her. He reached out in disbelief, after which he felt a wonderful warmth and calmness throughout his body. At that moment, the girl said that she agreed to take the boy as collateral, after which she asked him to hand him over. Circinia immediately reported that if the count hadn't paid her winnings within a week, she would simply have burned the entire building down. When the girl returned home with the slave, she said she wanted to renovate the house with the money she had earned. But the plans changed greatly. Instead of money, she brought a son, received as collateral. When Circinia was about to heal the boy's wounds, he started to refuse, saying that everything was fine. The girl told him to come closer, without making her count to 3 to do it. After these words, the boy immediately ran towards the witch, after which she began to bandage his wounds. At that moment, the boy asked Circinia what her name was, and how he could call her all the time while he was with her. When the girl asked the reply question, the boy, looking away, said he didn't have a name. Out of awkwardness, the witch quickly changed the subject and asked him how old he was now. The boy shyly replied that he was 19 years old, thus greatly surprising the girl. She understood perfectly that the boy looked like a schoolboy, but in reality, he was only a year younger than her. When asked if he was hungry, the boy said everything was fine and there was no need to feed him. At that moment, Circinia approached the pot of soup and said that if the boy didn't eat everything today, the soup would spoil. While making the fire, she realized that this was the first time she had used her magic on someone. One could only hope that this guy wouldn't tell anyone what he saw. At that moment, he looked admiringly at the bright redhead and energetically asked if she was a witch. Circinia calmly told him that she was the only one who knew how to control fire, after which she told him not to let go of the soup. Suddenly, the boy asked the witch if she had ever felt lonely living far away from all people. After which, he said sadly that after so long, he had gotten used to all the loneliness. When the boy officially called Circinia his darling, the girl asked to be addressed simply by her name. She perfectly understood the fact that there was no point in getting attached to anyone now, especially since the boy would leave in a week. Suddenly, the witch said she had thought of a name for the boy and suggested that the boy become Ben. At first, Circinia thought the boy didn't like his name, after which he started denying it, saying that he liked it. He was happy to receive at least some name, and especially from such a wonderful girl. So he couldn't help but like it. Previously, the empire began to allow the construction of gambling houses, after which the count lost his palace in a casino. Then, he desperately needed money to gain the emperor's recognition and be able to receive a lot of money. As a result, a year later he managed to buy back the palace, but now he was settling his debts through gambling. The probability of hitting the jackpot was very small, and besides, it was invented for the benefit of the count himself. But Circinia managed to win the jackpot more than once, which greatly ruined the owner's dreams. If he gave her the money, he would go bankrupt, so he decided to use Louis as protection. After some time, he returned to his palace, after which he started yelling at his assistant about all the chaos. Suddenly, the servant began to make excuses, saying that all this was the work of a redhead girl. The count raised his voice even louder, because he couldn't believe that the man couldn't handle the woman. Louis started shouting that this woman was crazy and had very strange powers. She used strange abilities that made him feel very hot, and a gust of wind blew up her hair. At that moment, the man realized that although his worker was stupid, he couldn't make up such nonsense. The count asked what had happened to the purchased slave, after which he became enraged because they had given the guy as collateral. He started yelling at the servant for being able to hand over such a valuable item to some girl just to provide collateral. The man's wealth was limited, especially compared to Antiu, who was the richest in the empire. The count greatly enjoyed seeing beautiful boys and men in front of him, which is why he took this slave. After this, the master sent a worker to find the one who had been given as collateral, and ordered the slave to be returned to him. It turned out that the man wanted to meet this very person in a week, but he lost the payment. Moreover, the man could not pay money to Circinia at that time. While Ben was eating, the girl really wanted to get to know the boy better, so she started talking to him. Suddenly, she realized he was still hungry, so she offered to serve him more food. She also began to pressure Ben by telling him that if he didn't eat the soup, it would spoil, and she would throw it away. But deep down, Circinia perfectly understood that the guy was accustomed precisely to slavery. At the same time, the witch continued saying that if Ben didn't finish eating, she would throw away the rest of the food. Without thinking twice, the boy leaned on the table and said he would try to finish everything remaining. A few minutes later, she heard Ben break another dish. The number was already approaching 5. After which Circinia silently took a broom and was going to remove all the fragments. She was not angry with the boy for his offense either. At that moment, Ben asked the girl to give him the broom. He was ready to clean everything himself. Most likely before, when Ben was a nameless creature, they taught him that if he didn't work, he wouldn't eat. Suddenly, the girl noticed that the boy flinched sharply, so she turned to him and asked him what had happened. Ben began to apologize to the witch for cutting his hand. He was afraid of what she would do. Circinia patted the boy and took the broom, after which she told him not to apologize for that nonsense. After a couple of minutes, the girl took a first aid kit and some cotton wool, after which she began to treat the injured finger. Looking at Circinia, Ben understood that because of her beauty, he couldn't do anything calmly. That's why he made so many mistakes. He also realized it was very warm next to her, so it seemed to him that the witch was precisely his light. Circinia carefully dipped the boy's finger in cotton wool, almost finishing the treatment this way. After the girl finished treating the wound, she asked the boy to be more careful next time. At the same time, Circinia noticed that in a couple of days the boy had caught up to the girl in height. When she realized Ben had grown so much in just 3 days, she felt very confused. But she was also happy to see how the boy was growing, so she planned to feed him more in the future. At night, Circinia saw that Ben was dreaming again about some kind of nightmare, which was not the first time. Magic while telling him everything would be fine. There was nothing else she could do. All she could do was warm and calm his breathing, and then wait for him to fall asleep. It also seemed to her that the boy's past, which he dreams about every night, was to blame for everything. Understanding this fact, she knew she couldn't return the former slave in that condition to those hands. She also knew she needed money to survive, but despite this, Circinia was going to take care of the boy. Suddenly, at that very moment, Ben opened his eyes, thus startling the witch, because she thought he had woken up thanks to her. The boy looked at Circinia embarrassed, after which he smiled tenderly at her and thanked her. At that moment, the girl realized that everything she did to Ben, he saw absolutely from the beginning. It turned out that the boy pretended to be asleep so as not to scare her, and now he was incredibly grateful. Without thinking twice, the witch smiled and told him not to worry about that, after which she wished him sweet dreams. In the morning, the witch was already waiting for Ben with her scissors to trim his hair. But the boy refused to cut his hair the whole time, so it seemed he really didn't want to. Or he was scared. Ben shook his legs and did not yield to the scissors, which made Circinia unable to do anything for a long time. After a while, she managed to calm down, thanks to which the girl began to cut his hair. When she finished working with the scissors, she noticed that Ben had a fever and his whole body was burning. At that moment, she jumped off her chair and was about to run away from the girl to calm down. Circinia abruptly grabbed him and told him to stop acting like that, thus scaring him. At that moment, Ben admitted that he was about to jump out of his chest. After which, the witch suggested that the man might have suffered a heart attack, which would force him to go to the hospital. At the same moment, Ben said that he felt much better, after which he returned to the chair and asked for his hair to be cut again. When the matter was finished, Ben said he would like the warmth of the witch's hands to always remain in his hair. At that moment, the servants wanted to find a person, but nothing went right for them, although they did their best. Since it was understood that this person was needed urgently, the whole group was confident they would find him. The curse lasted only 2 years, so the boy had to be urgently returned to the palace. It was also not necessary to return him alive, it was only necessary to find his body. While Ben and Circinia were having fun, they decided to bake bread together. Soon, the girl realized that she had completely run out of food, so everything simply came to an end. Seeing the witch's commotion, Ben excitedly asked what had just happened. He suddenly changed the subject and went on to say that he hadn't eaten meat in a long time, so he had to go to the market to buy some. The boy, like a dog, asked the girl if he could go with her. When Circinia refused Ben, his face immediately became sad, which made the girl feel uncomfortable. She also understood that she still had no money, and that's why she had to sell her jewelry. Circinia loved to dress elegantly for any occasion, so she never spared money on clothes. And jewelry. She spent a fortune her parents had on jewelry. The girl clearly understood that the witch was very lucky with this life, and besides, now she had something to live for. At that moment, Ben told Circinia that it would be very dangerous to walk alone, although going with him was much more dangerous. The girl asked the boy to be a kind and obedient boy, to try not to break anything. Then she would leave, having previously informed that she would not stay long at the market. In a moment, Ben told the girl that he would be waiting for her, which made the witch burst into a smile. A little later, she arrived at a jewelry store where she had gifted her jewelry and asked for the price. Since childhood, Circinia loved jewelry, so she developed a very good taste for fashion. At that moment, the man told the girl that there was a scratch on the ring, which would prevent him from offering her a high price. The witch understood that there wasn't a single scratch on the ring at home, so she looked at him with contempt. The jeweler gave the ring to her so she could see for herself what was wrong with it and assess the scratch. Since she knew very well that there couldn't be a scratch, she assumed it was a deliberate scratch. After which she grabbed the man. At that very second, she withdrew her hand, after which she began to explain some of the purposes of the piece of iron that stripped the ring of its wrapping in the first place. Hearing these words, Circinia grabbed the expensive ring and then ran the same piece of iron over it. Seeing what the girl did, the jeweler was horrified more deeply, because this ring was made of the purest gold. He immediately shouted that he would not give the girl her ring for more than 103,000. Not wanting to waste time on trifles, the witch said that she would not leave the man until he gave her 500,000. At that moment, the girl patted the jeweler on the shoulder and told him not to look at her appearance, because she wasn't that simple. After this, Circinia began to defend her position that she would wait at least 500,000 from the man. At that moment, the jeweler reluctantly raised the price of the ring when it reached 400,000. The witch's eyes began to shine. When she received her money, she went home happily and said that he only needed to give her the money immediately. After some time shopping, the witch bought everything she needed. Next time she would take Ben with her, although she understood that the boy would have to leave her in a couple of days. But they could also spend some time together, even though fate would soon separate them. At that moment, Circinia heard the words of strangers looking for her. Furthermore, a slightly shorter boy could be walking with her, and initially they only wanted to find him. The girl rounded the corner and began to wonder why this guy was looking for her. At that very moment, she realized that they were looking for Ben, which could become very dangerous for the boy. Suddenly, Circinia remembered that the boy was home alone, so she had to hurry so they wouldn't catch him first. She turned abruptly and, panicked and worried, ran towards the boy with all her might. At that moment, Ben was in a good mood. When the girl touched him, his heart began to beat much faster. He was very embarrassed by his thoughts, but he was glad that, despite his origin, he received warmth and care from her. In appearance, the redhead seemed very cold and unapproachable. But in reality, she turned out to be caring and affectionate. Furthermore, the witch was the first person to give the boy a name. He had never been called that before. Ben was very happy to realize that it was Circinia who gave him that name. At that moment, the boy became very embarrassed because the girl saved him, and his conscience allowed him those thoughts. Understanding the absurdity of this situation, Ben realized that he should have gone to ventilate a little. When he started living with a girl, she distributed the clothes for him, which meant that now he had to do the laundry. He began to think how good it would be for him if, after all this time, he learned to cook. At that moment, he heard Circinia's footsteps, turned around happily, and began to greet the returning witch. She snapped at the boy, after which she began to eagerly ask if Ben was okay. Ben didn't understand what Circinia was talking about, so he asked her, surprised, what could have happened to her. When the girl was sure that everything was fine, she told the boy that she only worried that he had broken the dishes again. Ben felt very embarrassed by so much closeness. He began to understand that because of this, the witch could easily feel the beating of his heart. Suddenly, he said that he was ready to help the girl carry her purchases home. As he left, he thought that in the future, the desire to be close to Circinia might disappear. At that moment, the worker apologized to his master for not being able to find that slave. The Duke expected this and ordered the servant to prepare 30 million shillings to pay the girl. Since they were supposed to come to see them in 3 days, they should have prepared the money in advance. The surprised man looked awkwardly at the gentleman and asked if he was really willing to pay such a sum. In any case, they couldn't leave everything as it was, because they would still have to give money for the return of the collateral. But first, it was necessary to find out where the witch lived and the promise that had been made to her. After which the Duke's plans were to kill the girl and forcibly take all the shillings she earned. At that moment, Circinia forced Ben to eat again, and now he cooked absolutely everything himself. The boy began to talk about how happy he was to see Circinia, enjoying the food he had prepared. At that moment, the girl was very surprised by Ben's behavior. He was behaving like a teenager in love. The boy still couldn't understand the fact that he started doing things without realizing the behavior. Suddenly, when the girl dropped her fork, the boy started panicking and immediately ran to find another one. Circinia felt very embarrassed and at that moment didn't understand what drove her to do this. She couldn't believe it either because she knew very well that she liked muscular guys. The moment Ben brought another fork, Circinia thought that even though his face was attractive, Ben was too thin. Suddenly she stood up abruptly and, embarrassed, said she was about to get up from the table. The boy began to apologize to her, so the girl told him not to react so strongly to this. Circinia quickly left and reported that the guy could finish all the remaining meat. When night came, she couldn't sleep due to the strong flow of various thoughts that completely overwhelmed her mind. The girl realized how foolish her action was, the main reason why she couldn't sleep. She also understood the fact that communication with Ben was simply like long-term affection. At home, the boy was like a little brother, which made her feel a lot of pity for him. Circinia understood that she shouldn't have stayed with Ben, although she really wanted to, because in the end it would be very bad. The plot could turn against the girl at any moment, and the boy would also be killed, despite his innocence. At that moment, Circinia decided that it was time to start moving away from Ben, so she replied dryly that she would do everything herself. At first, the boy didn't understand why she responded that way, but he didn't argue, and simply agreed. The remaining time they could be together was running out very quickly, and the day of separation from Ben arrived. That day, Circinia realized one fact. Most likely, the boy realized he couldn't let her go, despite all the mental pain. She smiled as if everything was absolutely fine, which surprised the girl. When the sun began to set, Ben took the witch's hand, and together they headed towards the true owner of the slave. At that moment, the man was sitting and very nervous, fearing that Circinia would change her mind. Before him was a letter from the richest count, who was waiting to meet the owner of the casino. The man understood that he was only expecting one slave, nothing more. He just wanted to please the other count. At that very moment, he stood up and began to shout at his worker because the woman had not yet returned the slave to him. Suddenly, Circinia entered the palace with Ben. Initially, no one recognized her due to her hood. When the man saw her face, he was pleasantly surprised by her beauty, which he initially did not expect. Without thinking twice, he asked Circinia to return the collateral she took a week ago. As Ben walked forward, the count realized that the boy had gained weight and had also changed his hairstyle. Circinia began to understand that to these people, Ben was only collateral and a toy, which made her believe that it would be better if the boy stayed with her. Suddenly, the man said that the girl should not worry about the slave's safety. They were willing to provide him with the best conditions. After all, the rich man promised to take care of this child, so that he would be happy living there. It turned out that Ben was supposed to go to other possessions tomorrow morning, at dawn. The worker handed the girl a suitcase containing her earnings, equivalent to 30 million shillings. After the fund transfer, the slave was quickly snatched away, and they began to snatch him from the witch. Her face immediately changed from emotion, and at that moment, they started telling her to come and collect her check. Suddenly, the girl misinterpreted the owner, who, according to him, just wanted to close a successful deal. She was not going to let him get away with it because he was following the girl, and if it happened again, Circinia would punish the man. Suddenly, she asked Louis to bring her a notebook in which the girl was supposed to leave her signature. After this, Circinia realized that from now on Ben's hands would always be cold, because now there was no one to warm him. After some time, the count began to severely torture the slave to tell him about the witch's powers. But when Ben refused to talk about it for the umpteenth time, the man completely lost his temper and said that he would find out himself. After finishing beating the slave, the count ordered not to touch the guy. He did not deserve this to happen to him. Suddenly, he gathered his last strength and shouted that no one should even dare to lay a finger on his Circinia. But since his hands were tied, there was no way he could do anything to the count, which he understood. Suddenly, he said that most likely this slave's behavior had its own charm. The man did not want to spoil the slave's beautiful face, but he had to do it, because he was too skinny. After which Ben, exhausted, was taken back to a dark room, where he would have to sit for the rest of the time. At that moment, Circinia lay down to rest, but she couldn't sleep because of all the thoughts that were driving her crazy. She decided to start moving somehow, in which case the bad thoughts might disappear on their own. Walking around the house, she began to imagine various moments involving Ben's presence. And she realized that she had started having auditory hallucinations. The brightest moments, where only she and Ben were involved, finally began to appear in her head. At that moment, Circinia finally decided that she must bring Ben back. Even if the final payment had been terrible, she believed she had an obligation to return him and take him out of slavery. Circinia was going to return absolutely all the money to the Count, and in exchange, get her Ben back. And at the same moment, the girl saw in front of her all those people who were present during the return of the collateral. Circinia was very displeased with the blatant visit of these guests. At that moment, the Count, accompanying everyone, asked her if the girl was coming back for the slave. If she wanted to know where the slave was, he would treat the guests accordingly. Because otherwise, she wouldn't have found Ben. The Count couldn't believe that the girl was so concerned about this unfortunate and pathetic slave. When the man began to cross all permissible boundaries, Circinia's evil form awoke in the girl's body. Seeing this sight, the man immediately realized that his employee was talking about exactly these forces. Suddenly, all those who had weapons began to attack the enraged witch at once. They all wished for her death. At that very moment, the witch grabbed one of these very people by the neck, causing the guy to choke. The Count began to shout at her not to kill him, because only he knew the whereabouts of the slave. The witch's sinister spirit shouted at the girl to tear out the man's tongue and then press on his throat. Trying to maintain control, Circinia realized that she couldn't kill him, so she had to maintain sanity. It began to seem to the Count that the witch had finally calmed down, which made him happy. And he immediately relaxed. When the man said that during the beatings of Ben, he only thought of the girl, which greatly surprised Circinia. Upon hearing all these words, the witch could no longer control her mind and finally gave up. Fire began to appear around the witch. She began to burn everything that stood in her way. A close colleague who was outside the door and saw the flames of the fire was immediately horrified by what was happening. He fell to his knees from the strong shock. For him, everything was incredible. The Count shouted for someone to save him. He did not want to die such a painful death. He prayed to Circinia to stop all this, at the moment when the man was ready to admit he was wrong. Going through the fire, the Count crawled towards the girl and, almost in tears, began to beg her to help him. Circinia was a real witch who felt no pity for anyone, not a single person. The transformed girl tried to calm down and begin to control all her powers, which was difficult. If the girl had not done this, she would have ended up following the witch's worst steps, and she would have had a tragic death. Seeing that everyone who had been present with the Count before, armed, were unconscious and probably dead, when she decided to check the bodies, she realized that the Count was still alive. She just needed to get him out. After a while, she pulled everyone out of the burning house and threw them onto the ground. She told the boy that there were many burns on the bodies, but despite this, everyone was alive. The worker's master took the full brunt of the anger on his body, which suffered the most. If the boy had been in his right mind, he would never have started blaming the girl for what happened now. He also said that no one should even dare to chase her, when suddenly he asked the girl to stop. She reluctantly turned around and, with a menacing look, asked what he wanted from her this time. Suddenly, the guy said that the witch should go to the Surrey River pier, which is where the slave was. Looking at him sternly, the girl asked what he was planning against the witch, reporting all this. At that moment, the guy handed the girl some papers from his suitcase, telling her she would need all that. The worker was plotting nothing against the girl, the money was hers. His only concern was taking care of the Count. He bowed before the girl and then told her that God would be on her side. After this, the girl immediately ran to the indicated place. She really wanted to be by Ben's side. She was very aware that after going through everything, she couldn't end up without the boy. At that moment, Ben was being led to his house due to the received slave cargo. The night was going to be difficult. The boy realized that from now on, everyone would treat him the same. Only Circinia accepted him as a person. She was the only one who helped him understand what true care meant. Ben terribly missed his beautiful Circinia. One of the men leading the slave began to order him not to waste so much time, but to get up immediately. When he realized that the slave was resisting the order, he decided to temporarily withdraw and simply take a break to smoke. At that moment, Ben realized that he could no longer feel the warmth received from his beloved witch. Lying on the cold and damp ground, Ben looked up at the sky and watched the raindrops falling. Now he wanted the rain to wash away everything in this world, except Circinia's hut. At that moment he heard the girl's voice, so his face immediately changed. He began to look around and search for her. He saw a redhead girl running towards him in front of him, shouting his name and searching for him. The witch immediately ran towards the wet boy and began to tell him that she would definitely free him. Seeing the whole situation, Ben's eyes almost started to water because the girl finally came to save him. Using her powers, she carefully burned the slack rope tied to the boy's body, thus freeing him. After this, Ben, who couldn't believe what was happening, began to approach the girl, thus checking her existence. Moving a little away from what had happened, the boy asked the girl if everything was all right with her, because the Count wanted to find her. At that moment, Circinia examined the man's body. It was all covered in new abrasions. In response to the girl's concerns about his health, Ben replied that he felt completely fine. The witch immediately apologized to him for leaving him alone, although she shouldn't have done that. Happy Ben carefully told the girl that she shouldn't have apologized for this, because he was happy to have her back. The witch said she always had to be alone, as she couldn't completely control her powers in a surge of emotion. Now Circinia was afraid of ending up causing irreparable harm to Ben due to her abilities. But after separating from her boyfriend, the girl realized that she was constantly thinking about him. She remembered his voice, his facial features, and she couldn't forget anything. It was because of these thoughts that she gathered strength and decided to bring Ben back with her. The witch desperately wanted to be near the boy despite what might happen. Having said these words, Circinia realized that most likely Ben would reject her now because she simply abandoned him. The girl, depressed by the bad thoughts, couldn't even look in Ben's direction. But he asked her to do so. At the same time, the boy affectionately said that he also constantly thought about Circinia after their separation. He moved as close as possible to the girl, after which he tenderly told her that he only wanted to be by her side. Some time later, the witch burned the document confirming Ben's slavery, thus freeing him. The pair wanted to find lodging for the night where nobody would know them, and then start their life from scratch. Therefore, they went wherever their eyes looked, initially wandering around various surroundings. During the journey, the boy and the girl talked about a variety of things. They talked about passing towns and places. On the third day of travel, they found a quiet village where they decided to stop. It turned out to be the village of Moulin, originally founded by only 3 people. But it soon began to grow. After a while, the elder helped the children find a small house in the vicinity. Spending time together in a quiet house where nobody bothered them, the girl and the boy were happy. As Circinia walked down a busy street with Ben, she realized she had to buy him new clothes. Did they also tell her that the village was very famous for its carpentry? Here the artisans worked very hard on various projects, and from hard tasks they got beautiful bodies. Looking at the swollen bodies, it was impossible to look away from Circinia. When Ben called her, the witch began to make excuses, saying that the carpentry process had caught her attention. But the boy was perfectly aware that this was not the case at all. She was watching the corpses. Circinia did not want to tell Ben her preferences immediately, so she decided to hide it. The boy showed the girl a beautiful bracelet, after which she was surprised when she wanted to buy it. He decided to tell her to look at the rest of the jewelry because she might find something better. At that moment, those who were looking for Ben arrived at the place where the girl's old hut was. Suddenly, a man realized that the old hut, which was quite large, had somehow burned down. The assistant only wanted to ask about this, but he couldn't say anything more about it. The man realized that this time they were late, which should have been reported to the master. Suddenly, he noticed many decorations on the ground, after which he decided to look at them and estimate the price. At that moment, he informed the assistant that now they couldn't hesitate, it was absolutely necessary to find Ben. He said that if anyone decides to get in their way, they will deeply regret their decision. In the morning, Circinia enjoyed her tea under the warm rays of the sun below the window. She looked at the fence and rejoiced at the wonderful and calm day. She wanted to live like this every day. Now she didn't want to stress about various reasons. Her life began to improve. At that moment, Ben ran up to her and excitedly announced that he had managed to find a job. When Circinia heard this, she began to feel that she was not contributing enough money for both of them. But then the guy said that he got a job as a carpenter and that he was happy with his work. Suddenly, the girl laughed pleasantly and tenderly, after which she covered her mouth and congratulated the boy on his new position. After a couple of seconds, Ben approached the girl and calmly asked her to hide her charming smile. Many different thoughts went through his head. It was difficult for him to contain his desire to kiss the witch. Some time later, Ben told the girl that today he would wash the clothes so that Circinia could rest. At that moment, the girl at first did not understand his desire to help, because he had hard work to do as a carpenter. But at that very moment, she remembered that she might have left her underwear among the dirty clothes. She immediately ran to the boy so that he would collect his things immediately, after which she began to ask him to stop. At that moment, Ben was already holding the witch's bra in his hands, and she began to shout at him to leave the clothes to her. When the boy realized what he was holding, he immediately felt very embarrassed by what had happened. He immediately began to apologize to the girl for taking it with him, thus making the girl laugh a little. Circinia asked the boy to calm down because he started to panic. After a while, the witch decided to treat Ben's wounds, after which she noticed that there were far fewer. One of the reasons why the girl agreed to treat the boy's wounds was the opportunity to see his bare torso. At that moment, the girl thought that Ben had reacted too emotionally to her underwear. Although her reaction was no better, as she shouted across the yard that he was holding her underwear in his hands. Suddenly, the girl noticed a scar on Ben's shoulder, so she decided to ask him where it came from. It turned out that the boy himself did not know where it was from. Most likely, it was a remnant of his childhood. Without thinking twice, the boy asked the girl if they could go to bed together that night. The day they met, Circinia allowed this to happen. Since then, it happened every night. Now it seemed to her that it was time to start resting separately. But at night, she realized that she again could not refuse his puppy dog look. And they ended up sleeping together again. Suddenly, Ben asked the girl to take his hand. Although she felt a little ashamed, she decided to do it. He told the girl that since her hands were always warm, the boy fell asleep more easily. Due to Circinia's long thoughts, Ben assumed she was against this, which is why he was a little upset. But the witch again could not refuse him, so she offered him her hand, making the boy happy. Circinia did not know if it was related to her powers, but when she made contact with Ben, she felt great. Furthermore, besides this, she could feel his heartbeat, which confused the witch a little. At night, the girl woke up because anxiety overwhelmed her. But when she realized that the boy had fallen asleep, she calmed down a little. After she fell asleep, Ben opened his eyes without thinking twice. He kissed the girl's hand, enjoying the moment. The boy began to feel very embarrassed by what he had done, and mentally apologized to Circinia for what he had done. At that moment, the searchers discovered where Ben was and informed the gentleman of his location. It took about 2 days by horse to travel to the village of Moulin. Located in the south, after receiving the order, the team moved there. The group commander was well aware that he absolutely had to get what he wanted. It was Ben who had to present himself before his master count. In the morning, the boy greeted Circinia and invited her to the table because he had specially prepared breakfast. Ben's culinary skills improved every day, which made the witch happily agree to have breakfast. She loved the potato pancakes Ben made, and knowing that the boy was trying just for her made eating much more pleasant. Suddenly, the girl, looking at Ben, realized that the boy had somehow changed lately. The witch informed the boy that he was a little burnt, which perplexed Ben. When he saw that the boy was happy that this was happening to him, the girl was surprised. But in any case, Circinia was happy to see the smile on the boy's face because it was beautiful. During breakfast, the boy and the girl had a fun time, talking about many things at the same time. After a while, Ben was getting ready to go to work, and the witch decided to accompany him. When he left, she thought about the fact that she accompanied the boy to work every morning, as if they were a married couple. A little later, Circinia realized that she could rest calmly, because Ben had done all the household chores in the morning. Today, the boy was going to receive his first salary, which he had been waiting for all month. Without thinking twice, the witch decided to cook something for the boy because he himself had been preparing everything for a long time. At the same time, while Ben was doing the task assigned to him, one of his colleagues asked him what he was going to do. He replied to the man that he wanted to make a certain gift with the money he received. The colleague assumed the gift was intended for Ben's girlfriend, which confused the boy greatly. But he perfectly understood the fact that Circinia was only his savior and protection. In gratitude for her actions, he wanted to become her protector and hoped she would approve of his decision. At that moment, the second man joined the first. He said that if the boy and girl weren't together at that moment, they definitely would be in the future. Novin couldn't even think about it. The boy didn't understand his feelings and couldn't decide on his desires. When he saw the girl, he felt warmth. He desperately wanted to kiss her wonderful lips and also hug her around the waist. And starting from these thoughts, the desires only grew stronger upon seeing Circinia's breasts. He experienced a surge of feelings. The workers said that if they weren't a couple, they were in the best marriage. At that moment, Ben burned with shame, so he immediately rushed to continue his work. In the evening, after work, the boy received his salary and wanted to get to the store before it closed. The boy also hoped that the girl would like his gift, although it wouldn't be especially expensive. At the moment of his thoughts, men appeared behind the boy, whom Ben, at first, did not pay much attention to. When he finally realized that all these men were confidently following him, Ben was horrified. At that moment, Circinia was already preparing her wonderful soup. There wasn't much time left before it was ready. The sun was supposed to set soon, and the boy was due back home, but this time he was late. The witch had been waiting for her friend for a long time, but even after sunset, he didn't return. The witch began to be tormented by various thoughts about why Ben never returned home. The next morning, she went to his workplace to ask if they had seen her boyfriend. After long wandering, the witch couldn't find out from anyone where Ben had gone. Either they didn't know him at all, or they simply didn't know where he had gone. For a long time, Circinia was desperate after Ben left. She couldn't get over what happened. After a long time, a girl named May began to worry about the state of her savior. This time Circinia, after her sleepwalking, woke up at the main entrance of the house. So she was a little beside herself. May asked the girl if the witch was hungry after all this, and then asked about her well-being. Circinia lay down on the bed again and began to remember what she had dreamed. For a long time it was the same. Over and over again, she realized that she was waiting for Ben after everything that had happened. And after that, she had a headache for a long time. May went to the girl's room and asked the witch if she had a headache again. She sat on Circinia's bed, but asked the girl to leave her alone for the moment. But May replied that she would not leave the witch, no matter how much she persuaded her. After all, there was no one else to take care of Circinia. In her difficult situation, only one girl could do it. Looking at the girl, the witch began to understand that during all the time the girl lived with her, she had grown a lot. She met her when she begged her for forgiveness, because she had never stolen anything. But she was accused of it. The girl was tossed back and forth for a long time. She was treated in the most terrible way. And very often she was intimidated. But at one point, Circinia defended this girl and began to care about her. And a few days later, the witch extended her hand to the girl and asked the girl if she could do something herself. Exactly 2 years ago, the witch offered help to the girl, and since that moment they lived together. The girl began to open the curtains of the room, while at the same time telling Circinia that the furniture should be delivered to the village today. She was very surprised when the girl broke the table in two with one hand. Suddenly, after saying this, the witch abruptly threw May out of her room, thus surprising the girl. She lived in the village of Moulin, where Circinia and Ben settled for about a year. And most likely Ben would have returned there. But the boy still wouldn't have precise information about her, which would make the search more difficult. The witch was angry with the boy for several months because he left without saying a word. But the girl couldn't tell anyone, so her behavior worried many people. Furthermore, due to what happened, she had to leave many things from her past, as painful as it was for her. Since the boy and the girl only lived together for a couple of days, the witch shouldn't have been so upset. After this, Circinia, without regrets, decided to leave the village of Moulin free from the past. There had been no news of the boy for about 3 years, which made the witch completely angry with the boy. Now the witch asked May if she had eaten this morning. The girl replied that she wanted to have breakfast with Circinia, but she realized that the girl was not going to have breakfast this morning. She wasn't going anywhere. Trying to put aside her worries, May wished the girl a nice walk and asked her to be careful. Since Circinia became her only savior, May was very worried about the girl. The girl perfectly understood that her savior seemed quite distant, but in reality, she was very affectionate. Furthermore, if the girl wanted to throw May out of the house, she would have done so long ago. But the girl also couldn't understand what was happening to Circinia, because she seemed to be fading before her eyes. The girl sometimes looked out the window, but her eyes seemed to wander like ashes in the wind. It was because of this that May decided to stay with Circinia, no matter the outcome. The girl decided to prepare her favorite potato pancakes for her savior before she arrived. At that moment, when the witch left her surroundings, she began to feel more alive. She wanted to escape all her thoughts, which is why she decided to go to one of the noisy places. She also remembered that May's dress was already worn out enough that she could buy her a new one. But even if she did this, the girl liked her first dress more. Suddenly, the girl was grabbed by the Count, whom she hadn't seen for more than 3 years. And he held her tightly by the wrist. He greeted the girl, saying they hadn't seen each other in a long, long time, and the desire for revenge was visible in his eyes. Circinia looked severely at the man with her cold gaze. She didn't want to answer his questions because it was none of his business. One day, an assassin snuck into the witch's house, and May, whom May met at the entrance. When she saw a huge male silhouette in front of her, she began to scream in fear. And the assassin fled, surprised. Circinia was about to leave the annoying Charles. The girl turned around and began to put the dark hood of the cloak on her head, hiding her red locks. Seeing that the witch didn't listen to him at all, Charles began to get very indignant. But he didn't bother her. The girl perfectly understood that he most likely had a reason to wander around the neighborhood so openly. At that moment, Circinia grabbed one of these same people by the neck, causing the guy to choke. The Count began to shout at her not to kill him, because only he knew the whereabouts of the slave. The witch's sinister spirit shouted at the girl to tear out the man's tongue, and then press on his throat. Trying to maintain control, Circinia realized that she couldn't kill him. So she had to maintain sanity. It began to seem to the Count that the witch had finally calmed down, which made him happy. And he immediately relaxed. When the man said that during the beatings of Ben, he only thought of the girl, which greatly surprised Circinia. Without fear of anyone. He, being the son of a foreman, had his own power, so he behaved as if the whole world was at his feet. At that moment, the issue was that the boy's father was simply very familiar with the Lord, thanks to which he had connections with the aristocracy. It was obvious to Circinia that he thought only a lonely woman lived in the house. That's why he appeared in the middle of the night. At that moment, Charles began to ask the girl if she had proof that he was the one who committed many of the acts. The witch immediately understood that the man knew she had no proof, so he took advantage of the moment and angered her. Suddenly, Circinia told him to be careful with his words, because if they caught him, the witch would not forgive him. When the girl started to let him go, Charles started to stop her, because he did not finish what he had planned. He could not afford to be so careless in this town, as most only wanted to please and receive attention. The man was furious about the witch's behavior. He believed that at the slightest difficulty, Circinia would simply collapse. When he wanted to grab the witch to stop her, she abruptly turned her action towards himself. And he found himself under Circinia's strongest control. Everyone who saw what was happening was horrified. No one could believe that such a fragile girl was capable of such a thing. As soon as Charles began to choke, Circinia immediately released him, thus allowing the man to understand that he should not mess with her. She immediately told him that he was the first to attack her, and Circinia simply retaliated. Alias. Many people saw Charles sexually abusing the witch, but they said nothing about it. Because the man was the son of an old man, the sons started shouting at everyone because they were only watching a man being humiliated by such a girl. A boy immediately helped him. He lifted the count for the night and helped him walk, which made Charles feel even worse. Suddenly he turned around, because behind him, a guy started whispering about how Circinia was a witch. Charles began to listen carefully, and it turned out that Circinia had fled a long time ago. And she couldn't be here now. When the son attacked the victim, he started saying that this witch was a real monster. It was she who left him with a burn on his face. At night, the girl brought a new and beautiful wooden table to her hut, which greatly surprised May. Circinia also gave the girl her new dress, which left May a little perplexed. When she unwrapped it, her eyes shone with joy. It was a wonderful pink dress. The girl looked at her savior and thanked her for all the care she provided. The witch didn't dislike the girl. She was also grateful, but for the moment the girl wanted to live the story calmly. She shouldn't have gotten fonder of someone, because there was already a moment that worried the witch. Suddenly, the girl just turned around and started leaving the room where Matt was, thus surprising the girl. At night, a man got lost in the forest. Examining the terrain, he found nothing interesting and the road was long. But since the man had a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, he wanted to return as soon as possible. After walking a little further, he began to smell something burning, which immediately made him suspicious. Soon he saw a burning house, which frightened him. At that moment, Circinia woke up in front of the threshold of the house because she felt cold. Realizing where she was horrified. This time, after sleeping, she didn't wake up in her bed every time a girl opened her eyes. She is in different places. Before, at least, she woke up inside her own house, but now she was completely on the street, which was very bad. Circinia knew very well the name of this illness. She suffered terribly from her sleepwalking every night. She always walked asleep, not realizing that it was very inconvenient for life. Now the girl will have to lock the door every time, so she cannot leave the house while sleeping. She walked a little forward and began to realize that her body was gradually freezing. So she had to return home as soon as possible. At breakfast, May asked her about Circinia, and everything seemed normal with her, as she slept all day after the bath. Since the witch didn't look well, the girl began to worry about her well-being. But it turned out that everything was fine. At the same moment, May informed the girl that the barn had burned down during the night, causing this year's entire harvest to burn. There was information that the fire started because someone set fire to something inside. And as a result, everything nearby burned down. Since it was in this barn that the entire harvest for the winter was placed, the culprit would not get away with it. At that moment, people started banging on Circinia's hut, shouting for her to come out immediately. When the witch was about to leave, May asked her to stay, because apparently those who came were hostile. But Circinia asked the girl not to worry about anything, and most importantly, not to take risks, and at that moment the girl needed to check something. When the girl came out of the house, everyone simultaneously began to accuse her of being the one who burned the barn with witch skills. Charles began to tell her that the witch would suffer a very serious punishment for what she had done, and she couldn't avoid it for anything. Circinia leaned her elbows on the door and calmly asked the people if they really believed she started the fire. Charles immediately replied that there was no one else to do this, which is why the girl pleaded guilty. The man realized that simple conversations with the girl would be useless. So he said that there was a witness on her side. A scared guy approached who did not want to say anything, but the Count ordered him to tell everything he saw. When the boy began his story, Charles looked at him sternly and told him with his eyes to continue. He pressured the boy on the fact that his beloved was with him at that moment. Now it was a very good opportunity to prove his worth. And in a moment, he shouted that it was actually Circinia who set fire to the barn, thus destroying the harvest. The witch looked at him with incomprehension and coldness, and asked again if he had really seen her. Charles told the girl not to even try to threaten Golden, because everyone already knew the whole truth. He added that she had already done this with one of the huts before, so there was no doubt. Goosebumps ran down the girl's body. She couldn't believe that the man remembered what happened 3 years ago. According to the boy, one hut was not enough for the witch, so she decided to burn the whole village at once. At that moment, May ran out to the people, waving a broom and shouting that Circinia had been with her the whole time. The girl stood up to defend her savior and did not allow the people to do what they had planned. They immediately began to think that the girl was an accomplice, so there was an order to catch both of them. When they grabbed May, she started screaming and fighting, which forced them to hold her tighter. Seeing what was happening, her evil essence began to awaken in Circinia's body. So they told her that this would not have saved the girl. If the witch had given up alone, Charles was ready to go so far as to leave the little one alone. At that moment, the girl started shouting at him to simply run away without thinking about her. But Circinia was not going to do this, so she remained by Charles's side, who was delighted with his conquest. After a while, the girl was put behind bars. Charles decided to visit her to finally enjoy her pitiable appearance. He was also willing to give the girl a chance to leave her life. To do this, she would have to kneel before Charles. In that case, he could have told his father to forgive the witch and simply pardon her. But Circinia had no intention of humiliating herself like that in front of Charles. She tried to keep calm and not pay attention to him. Realizing this, the man began to press the girl by telling her that with such behavior she had clearly signed her own death sentence. Suddenly, the witch replied that Charles was not even capable of touching the girl's body. Not even with one finger. This greatly angered the man, who began to kick the prison cage and shout at Circinia. At that moment, the girl thought that she really should die, because no one knows how long such a terrible life will last. No matter how luxuriously she lived, no matter how delicious her food was, the witch felt nothing because of loneliness. Circinia had felt very lonely for 4 years, which left her terribly exhausted. The Count was incredibly outraged by the witch's enormous pride, which made him lose his temper more and more. But for Circinia, everything was useless. She was ready to close her eyes so that all this torment would end. After a while, everyone gathered in the main square and shouted that it was necessary to destroy this witch. Stones were thrown at the girl as she was led to the place of her death. Absolutely everyone present wanted her dead. Mentally, Circinia did not understand what they called dark magic, and faced with the accusations, she had to at least work on its precision. The girl was blamed for all the problems that occurred, thus declaring a true witch hunt. Lately, Circinia only wanted to live in complete peace, where no one would bother her. But this turned out to be very difficult. During the death sentence, May began to shout at everyone to let her savior go, because she had done nothing wrong. The girl's behavior reminded Circinia a lot of Ben's behavior a few years ago, which made Circinia think about how he was doing. Nothing helped her forget the boy. Memories of Ben remained in her heart forever. They wouldn't disappear anywhere. The boy was worried about the girl, even in the moments when he himself had to suffer a lot. At that moment, the witch began to devise a plan for her salvation. She could simply burn down the entire village and escape. Since her powers were revealed, it was expected, but Circinia wondered if they would chase her after that. But in this case, she would have to burn a little. The witch was going to flee with her companion May. Charles began to shout for everyone present to watch how the witch was about to give up. After which, the man whispered in the girl's ear that the witch's death had completely escaped his notice. From Charles's reasoning, it was clear that he assumed the witch was incredibly scared at that moment. But to save her life, she only had to ask Charles himself for help. After everything started to catch fire, Circinia realized that everything was going perfectly according to her terrifying plan. When the fire started, one had to maintain prudence. Otherwise, everything would have been in vain. Suddenly, the witch heard the army shout at the soldiers to surround and capture Charles himself, which greatly surprised the girl. A few minutes later, the man was already grabbed and they began to take him away, although he tried to escape the strong grip. At that moment, one of the soldiers approached the girl and told her that he would immediately remove the ropes from her body, thus freeing her. When they untied her, the witch couldn't understand why the events had been like this, because even the local guards should have been against the girl. At that moment, in front of her, Circinia saw a wonderful uniformed boy who approached her affectionately. Looking at him, the girl couldn't understand who he was, because she had never met him before. When the man took the girl's hand and kissed it, the witch didn't know why he did this. But at that moment, Circinia saw little Ben's gaze on the man's face. So she couldn't believe it. After her guess, the girl carefully compared him to the boy, after which she concluded that they didn't look alike. But suddenly, the man told the girl that during her recent absence, he had missed her very much. He also noticed that the girl had lost quite a bit of weight, after which he asked how she was feeling. Adult Ben greatly regretted having arrived almost late, and his Circinia would have died. At that moment, the girl understood that the boy's voice had become very velvety, like that of a real man, and in general he had changed a lot. Ben handed Circinia some warm clothes, while she tried to make sure it was really him. But when he noticed traces of ropes on his hands, the man became enraged because no one dared to touch his Circinia. After throwing his jacket over the witch, he menacingly announced that he would kill the man who hurt Circinia. When he pulled out his sword, the witch was very surprised. She couldn't believe he was really ready to kill Charles. Charles, after all, according to the girl, a person who until recently was a harmless child, has become capable of doing such a thing. Charles lay tied up in a corner, shouting in horror to untie him immediately. But bitter Ben was not going to forgive the man because he put his Circinia in great danger. If he had arrived a minute later, the inevitable would have happened, which deserves more punishment than simple murder. When Ben's sharp sword had already touched Charles's throat, the witch shouted at the man to stop. But he didn't want to stop, because this count had acted terribly towards Circinia. But the witch couldn't allow Charles to be killed, so she repeated to Ben that she was asking him to stop. After thinking for a while, Circinia asked Ben why he had returned here after so long. After all, recently he was still a harmless teenager who was shorter than her. Now he has become a real man with his own new life. His hands were already completely strengthened. Not a single scar remained on his face. After slavery, he began to live very worthy of himself. During the whole time he was away, he had a simply wonderful life. And only Circinia ate leftovers. As the girl had assumed earlier about her terrible current life, she was very wrong. At that moment, after all the pain she had gone through, the witch felt like a complete fool. Ben, however, couldn't understand why Circinia was now trying so hard to reject him. Suddenly, the girl informed the boy that if he had already finished his work, he could return to his domains. After which she turned around and headed to her hut, running many thoughts through her head. If Ben had not originally appeared in her life, most likely she would not have suffered so much now. There was nothing more painful than simply losing the closest and warmest person to your heart. That's why she felt terribly bad. She felt empty inside during these 3 years. Ben disappeared from her life completely on his own whim, without saying a word about it. And now he has returned. At the same moment, May followed Circinia and began to ask the girl how she felt. When the girls were home, Ben knocked on their door, so the girl asked the witch if she should have opened it. At that moment, Circinia told May to pack all the things that were important to her, because now it was no longer possible to stay in the village. Suddenly, May became sad and said with a sad voice that if everything continued like this, it would be very bad. But for Circinia at that moment, all this didn't matter at all. At that moment, Ben sat on the threshold and wondered if he had really returned too late to his Circinia. The witch perfectly heard Ben calling her, which made her feel uncomfortable. May told the girl that most likely, this man was waiting for the witch outside. Circinia couldn't understand her feelings, because at that moment she loved him and hated him at the same time. The girl was interested in some questions, but she didn't know if she should ask them right now. But suddenly, she decided to ask her savior if he was annoyed when the men arrived. After which, she added to her question what could have caused the witch to be so cold to him. But she was not going to ask the main questions that interested her at that moment, because most likely everything was as he expected. May wanted to know if this was the man Circinia had been looking for all the time in her dreams. Deep down, she perfectly understood what the consequences of each of her questions could be. Suddenly, Circinia told May that he was the one who disappeared 3 years ago without saying a word. And now he just returned. Most likely this greatly angered the witch, because she had the opportunity to at least warn. When May suggested this, Circinia was surprised because she had never thought of it before. But in fact, after Ben left, she was not only angry, but terribly annoyed by this action. The boy treated her as if the girl deserved it. But on the other hand, she shouldn't have worried about him so much. At that moment, May told the girl as a support that if she were in this situation, she would have done exactly the same. Suddenly, Circinia asked the girl to help her a little because she herself did not want to go out. A little later, the girl approached Ben and told him that no matter how much he asked, Circinia would not go out. At that moment, Ben asked the girl how long she had lived with her Circinia, and how well they knew each other. When the girl informed the man that everything was fine with the witch, he calmed down a little. May thanked Ben for what he did for the girl today, because it was a very strong act. And then the girl asked him to leave this place, because that was Circinia's wish. May was ready to convey some of the boy's words, but after he left her territory. Since it was really Circinia's request, she couldn't do anything about it, no matter how much she wished he hadn't done it. May was always on Circinia's side, no matter how much she wanted to help Ben. After a while, his assistant approached the man with some information. All these lands belonged to Count Dexter, whose son was finally arrested. The disgruntled man ordered his assistant to simply destroy this man for his misconduct. But the soldier perfectly understood that it was very risky, because Ben received his title less than a month ago. For the time being, his position was too unstable, which could have serious consequences. From a political point of view, this could mean that the man wanted to take control of everything. At that moment, the assistant remembered Circinia and the ease with which she could influence Ben. She was his lover for more than 3 years. It was thanks to her that all this happened. And at that moment, the captain announced that Circinia herself would not like this action very much. After these words, Ben began to think that she really didn't like being so cruel to people. Ben reported that in this case, it was necessary to leave that count alive, but not to allow him to be released. At that moment, the close colleague asked the boss how much he was going to tell the girl about what happened. Ben was willing to tell her everything if Circinia was willing to forgive him after that. If only she had opened the door and looked at him, he would have immediately started explaining to her what really happened. He was ready to accept any reaction, accept her offense, but at the same time tell her everything. And stay close. He would never give up, because he wanted to be the one the girl could rely on. Ben was ready to wait until Circinia wanted the same. He had been waiting for this moment for the 3 years. While the witch was trying to fall asleep, the falling rain began to remind her of the very day she freed Ben. After that, she decided to distract herself by thinking whether May had collected the things that needed to be washed. Suddenly, she decided to go out and see if Ben had abandoned the site. Peeking out, she saw him in front of her. He bowed before the girl without saying anything at that moment, leaving Circinia perplexed. After the girl approached him, he told her that he had been completely wrong the whole time. He took the witch by the hand and tenderly asked her not to leave him so coldly again. At home, she told him to stop calling her because she was standing in front of him at that moment. The witch lit a fire in the fireplace, after which she thought she should look for dry things for Ben. She prepared to go to the pantry and asked the boy to stay put and warm up. When he humbly replied that he would do so, the witch realized that, apart from his physique, Ben hadn't changed at all. Circinia returned a couple of minutes later, and Ben was already greeting her happily. Like a faithful dog, she handed the boy a shirt and showed him where there was a bathroom where he could change. When he saw his shirt, the guy said that he supposed Circinia had already thrown away all his things. Hearing these words, the witch was embarrassed, but replied that she simply hadn't organized her pantry for a long time. In her thoughts, the girl understood that she simply couldn't throw away his shirt immediately after the boy left. But she didn't tell Ben these details because she considered it her weakness. When the boy asked about her wrist, she couldn't believe that even now the boy was worried about her. At that moment, she noticed that the boy's lips were very bitten, after which she told him to stop doing that. Ben noticed that Circinia's hands were still warm, just as they had been several years ago. Suddenly, the boy said that the whole time he spent without Circinia, he couldn't stop thinking about her. After these words, the girl sent Ben to the bathroom to bathe there and then returned to her. At that moment, she thought that after his return, she would invite him for tea and then ask him about his new life. But at one point, she saw Ben's jacket and assumed that it most likely needed to be washed. When she began to examine it, her gaze fell on a button pattern that the girl had never seen before. It was the face of a lion with snakes around it, after fully understanding the image. Circinia began to guess where the guy was from. At that moment, Ben came out of the bathroom, looked at the girl, and told her that she was very pale. After that, he excitedly asked what had happened, after which he assumed that Circinia had frozen. Suddenly, the girl asked Ben who he was. First he disappeared, and now it turns out he is who knows what. Her face became more and more severe. She repeated the question to the boy about who he was. After Ben asked what she was talking about, the girl drew his attention to the pattern on the buttons. She had never seen it before in her life, but she had read a lot about it in books. It was one of the symbols of people close to the crown prince, or rather the emblem of the first family that Circinia pursued. She couldn't believe she was capable of seeing this in real life, but she also couldn't understand why Ben had it. In the original story, the Duke was called the Crimson Lion of the Empire, which corresponded to his essence. It was hard to believe that someone who was an ordinary servant, given as collateral, was the heir. But after Ben appeared in front of the girl last night, this fact was most likely true. When Circinia asked the boy his real name, he replied that he would remain Ben his whole life. But he was also a Lechtmicken Shorbach, which horrified Circinia because everything started to converge. At that moment, the boy said that he was ready to answer all the accumulated questions from the girl. It turned out that Ben learned about his origin exactly 3 years ago, when he disappeared. That day, some disguised people came and took Ben away, pretending to kidnap a person. While he was given the opportunity to live in the Duke's family, Ben received the lesson of an heir for 3 years. After the death of his father Cantred, the boy inherited the highest title of Archduke. In the novel, the Duke really died, but he died at the hands of his son, who wanted to take power. But at that moment, Ben made his own mistake because he couldn't find Circinia before that time. Suddenly, Ben asked Circinia if she had received any letter from him because he had sent her a large number of them. When he learned that the girl had not received anything, he suddenly looked away and apologized for this question. He perfectly understood that all this happened precisely because of his fault, because he believed that he would explain everything personally. Circinia understood Ben, but decided to ask him why he had returned to her. Ben immediately began to dismiss the possibility that he was asked to capture the witch, because it was completely false. The indignant witch asked him why he was looking for her in that case, and added that he shouldn't hide anything. He suddenly replied that he had returned for the old vow to be together, which they made 3 years ago. He remembered every moment of his life with Circinia and never forgot anything, especially the oath. He always wanted to be near Circinia. He didn't need anyone else. When Ben invited the girl to move with him to the capital, the witch couldn't believe it. After this, the boy asked the girl that people in this place always tried to harm her. and that she didn't consider this place dangerous. But at that moment, Circinia wondered if she could be sure that everything would be safe. Furthermore, she didn't want to get involved with the main characters of the novel in the capital, which is why she lived in remote villages. If Ben were the boy he was 3 years ago, then she would have believed those words without fear. But now it was difficult. But the boy would have been happy with any option. He simply wanted to live next to Circinia, which is why he was willing to move in with her. He apologized to the witch again for everything that happened and asked her to allow him to stay with her. Ben was very aware of how shamelessly he had acted, which made him feel ashamed. When suddenly Circinia looked away. She couldn't send him back home in such rain, so she was ready to make space for him. Suddenly May came out of her room and told Circinia that she had gotten up very early today. At that moment, the girl immediately started telling her that if she was hungry, the witch could quickly prepare something for her. After which, she abruptly began to usher May out of the room, saying that today the girl wanted to cook something. At that moment, Ben was thinking about why his letters did not reach the girl's house. The guy started assuming that some person could deliberately prevent him from communicating with Circinia. At night, when everyone had gone to bed, Ben saw a witch wandering in front of him, which surprised him quite a bit. He approached the girl, put his arm around her shoulders, and then asked why the witch was walking in the middle of the night instead of sleeping. But at that moment, he noticed that Circinia was still asleep, so he assumed that she couldn't find the room. Of which Ben decided to carry the girl back to the room, so he carefully took her in his arms. Various thoughts and desires began to flood his mind, but Ben realized that he had to come to his senses. To get to Circinia's room, in any case, he would have to cross the living room, because it was the only way through. At that moment, he heard the dissatisfied voice of May behind him, who asked the boy what he was doing. He suddenly realized that this time, Circinia had left her room again and went for a walk around the house. May explained to Ben that the witch was actually asleep, but acting as if she were awake. The girl told the boy that this was called sleepwalking, which surprised Ben because he didn't know such a thing. Ben's hand involuntarily clenched into a fist, and he asked May to tell him more about this process. It turned out that May had been observing this since she met Circinia 2 years ago. But at that moment, this happened very rarely, but recently it began to happen more frequently. Most likely, this happened before she met her, but it was precisely because of this problem that the witch could not sleep normally. Hearing this story, Ben began to worry about his Circinia, but at that moment, the girl said it was normal. However, deep in her soul, May told the boy that if he wanted to help Circinia, he should have come earlier. At that moment, Ben told the girl that he would take Circinia back to her room, to which May gave her consent. When the girl was in her bed, Ben looked at her and clearly realized that the witch was beautiful. Because of her beauty, it seemed unreal, which made him feel as if the girl would disappear as soon as the boy took his eyes off her. In Ben's head, the idea spun that he didn't even suspect that the girl was so seriously ill. He placed his hand on the girl's face and gently asked her not to get sick, because it was very uncomfortable. In bed, he also wanted to keep kissing her lips and simply touch the girl's body, because he liked it. But the girl herself was much more important to him than Ben's own greed, which is why he couldn't afford it. For the time being, he was willing to wait until Circinia herself wanted the same. When morning came, the wonderful girl woke up in her bed, which she didn't understand at first. The moment she realized this, she realized that she hadn't sleepwalked that night. So she managed to get enough sleep. Suddenly, she saw Ben lying on the edge of the bed, asleep in front of her, so she was quite surprised. She wondered why the boy was sleeping here, because before he was in his room. When the girl wanted to wake him up to ask him this, Ben reflexively grabbed her and threw her onto the floor. At the same moment, the scared Circinia asked Ben what he had done, because she hadn't even attacked him. The boy began to make excuses, saying it was just a habit, which made the witch think. Ben immediately blushed deeply, covered his face with his hand, and then, embarrassed, pointed at the witch's hand. Circinia looked where her hand was and immediately realized she was touching his thigh. She immediately withdrew her hand and began to apologize for what happened, embarrassing Ben even more. Already embarrassed, Circinia told the boy that it would be better for her to leave first, after which she immediately ran away. As she walked to the kitchen, she thought about what had happened and realized how embarrassing it had been. At that moment, she met Arsene, who called the girl and told her his position. Circinia approached the man, after which she also introduced herself and also offered him her hand for a handshake. Ben's assistant carefully took the girl's hand and told her that it was an honor for him to meet her. Circinia noticed that he was greeting her as if the girl were the heroine of a movie. When Arsene kissed her hand, dissatisfied Ben appeared behind Circinia and asked the boy what he was doing. The assistant replied to his master that it was just a greeting and nothing more. After Arsene left, Ben told Circinia that she should wash her hands before eating. At that moment, the assistant returned and apologized to Ben because he didn't think the gentleman would get so angry at the greeting. Suddenly, Circinia asked the boy his name and then invited him to have breakfast with everyone. When everyone sat down at the table, May felt uncomfortable and asked Circinia if she had put too much salt. Arsene and May noticed that the boy and the girl hadn't looked at each other all morning. So they began to worry. The girl also looked at Arsene and realized that he was very cautious about something. It was on this occasion that she realized she should have finished breakfast, so she reported that she was full. Suddenly, Ben severely asked his assistant to accompany him. He needed to talk about something. After the two boys left, Ben sat the assistant on his knees in front of him and told him that, at this rate, he wanted to die. Realizing his mistake, Arsene apologized and then informed the master that the crown prince wanted to meet him. Apparently, this was because news reached him about what happened last time. Ben looked away and thought about it, because he had just met someone he hadn't seen in 3 years. But this was even better, because the crown prince shouldn't have been given the opportunity to become interested in Circinia. Arsene also didn't know where the letters written by Ben for Circinia went, because the plan to send them was complex. First, they had to be delivered to the family butler, and he, in turn, had to send them himself to the location. When the assistant's master was Cantred, the boy had no choice but to do what they told him. Ben immediately realized that Burdick, who was close to the former duke, had been interfering with him the whole time. Suddenly, the guy said that Burdick should be deprived of his powers today in the Shorbar family, and also imprisoned in the basement. After a while, May watched how skillfully Ben handled dishes with his hands without breaking them. At that moment, she decided to tell the boy about the potato bread, after which she asked if he knew how to cook it. When May told the boy that Circinia was hopelessly in love with him, the girl shouted his name indignantly. But since it was true and the witch practically ate nothing but this bread, she did not object to anything. After this, the girl said that she had done nothing wrong. She simply talked about the witch's preferences. After a while, May showed Ben where all the ingredients they would need were located. When Ben baked his potato bread, Circinia noticed that it was baked better than usual. And at that moment, she realized that different feelings were beginning to arise in her head, and quite incomprehensible ones, which the witch initially did not understand. While the girl was sitting thinking, May asked why Circinia was so worried, since nothing seemed to have happened. After her question about whether the witch would help today, the girl replied that May should ask her herself. After a while, Ben approached the girl and told her that at that moment, he needed to return to the capital for a while. Furthermore, if he leaves now, he will have time to reach the capital by day, which is much better. He kindly asked the girl to wait for his return. The thought crossed her mind that Ben had asked her to wait for him after such a long absence, and without prior notice. Without thinking twice, the girl simply wished the boy a good trip without answering the question she expected. Ben understood from her ambiguous answer that she would not listen to the words and that she would wait for him. A slightly annoyed guy told Circinia that he was going to change clothes and leave. When he went to change clothes, the witch smiled and thought that such behavior did not suit his team. At that very moment, she saw something shiny on the floor in front of her, so she decided to pick it up. And look! When she did this, the girl realized that it was a button from the boy's clothes. She went to the boy's room to give him what he had lost. When she entered, she called the boy's name. But at the same moment she saw Ben's back, there were many elongated scars. And oblong. She immediately ran to him and began to ask what it was and where they came from. The witch asked Ben to tell her how he got all these terrible scars on his back. Ben looked away from the girl and carefully told her that he received them during training. But Circinia couldn't believe it, because she couldn't even imagine such training that would cause him so many injuries. She immediately realized that the boy's words were a common lie. And common because even a fool would have understood that there would be no such scars from training. And Ben, knowing that the witch didn't believe him, continued to hide some things from her. At that moment, Ben leaned towards her and told the girl that everything was fine, and that the scars were nothing special. After thinking for a while, Circinia silently handed the boy a hand holding a button. After that, she thought that the reason for his long absence lay precisely in those scars. After a while, Ben arrived at the designated place as Crown Prince, but when he saw the boy, he felt unhappy. After all, the prince didn't tell anyone that Ben would come to see him at dawn, because at that moment he had his own plans. But he was willing to forgive the boy for this mistake if he started coming to him much more often. Without thinking twice, Ben handed the paper to Belfar, who asked him to look at it and decide what to do. When the boy discovered its content, he couldn't believe it was really true. But Ben told him to investigate the matter. The location of the base of the people mentioned in the written message has been revealed before. Belfar was unhappy that this man continued illegal activities in the empire. After prostitution, he went into the slave trade. Furthermore, the crown prince was surprised how Ben managed to carry out this whole investigation. If Duke Kylo had found out about Ben's governance in the territory of his duchy, the man definitely would not have stayed away. Belfar had never seen so much interest in something in a boy before, so he was a little surprised by this behavior. He immediately assumed that he was showing off because of the girl who was there. The crown prince began to want to meet someone who could so easily control such a stern man. At that moment, the boy told him that Belfar shouldn't even dare to show any interest in this girl. After these words, he set off to his place because he understood that his visit was over. And his work was done. When it started to get dark, Ben returned on a black horse to Circinia's hut, and then prepared to enter. Upon entering the house, he saw May crying in the kitchen, so he immediately ran to her and started asking her what had happened. As soon as he learned that Circinia decided to leave, he immediately ran to the place May was talking about. The witch told the girl that when the boy simply left without saying a word, he acted very unfairly. That's why Circinia wanted to go to the square, but she didn't take me because she would have walked more with the girl. As Ben ran towards the square, a bad feeling constantly pursued him. He prayed that nothing would happen to his Circinia during this time, and that she would be fine. At the same time, when the witch wandered through the market, everyone present was horrified because they understood what she had recently done. Realizing this fact, Circinia decided that she should have acted confidently, since she hadn't even done anything. After that, she needed to make a plan. She should have known Golden from the beginning. Then it was possible to turn to Charles, who set up this whole system of accusations. She immediately grabbed the nearest boy by the shoulder and then asked where Golden was. When they told her that he had left the village, the witch immediately sank, because he was her main task. After all, except Golden, no one would have been able to remove all these charges from her, which made the task very difficult. Since Circinia couldn't contact him, she decided to go see Charles in prison first. Many said that he was locked up in the same place where he had previously locked up the witch, so finding him would not be a problem. At that moment, the girl was hit on the head with a stone. She saw in front of her a group of stupid teenagers who were aggressive towards her. They were shouting at her to calm her face because she looked like a crazy murderer. After which, the teenagers started laughing, imagining how she would burn everything in her path. At that moment, Circinia had only one thought in her head. She couldn't understand what she had done wrong. She heard the children shouting to kill her because people like her didn't deserve to live. Suddenly, Circinia's evil spirit awakened in her head, who also began to tell her that she should simply kill her aggressors. He asked the girl how she came up with this idea, because it was one of the best solutions. At the same moment, fire began to form under the girl's feet, which greatly frightened the teenagers. The boys immediately fell to the ground, gasping and begging the witch for mercy. Because no one wanted to die. Circinia asked the body why it was hesitating, because killing everyone would be better for both of them. The evil spirit began to take over the girl's body. He believed that if he destroyed everyone, nobody would neglect their body and character. Upon hearing all these words, the girl began to feel very strange sensations that she could not distinguish. She couldn't control her emotions. Just like last time, uncontrollable anger flooded her mind. When Circinia approached the guy who traumatized her, he immediately began to beg her not to touch him. He began to admit his guilt in everything. He was willing to do anything to stay alive. Bitter Circinia looked at him with a sinister gaze, after which she asked if he had grasped the full seriousness. At that very moment, everything around him burst into flames. The people began to scream in pain and desire for salvation. Immediately, the witch grabbed her aggressor by the neck, causing him to choke. The boy heard threatening words that everyone who decided to do this were very, very stupid. Suddenly, he noticed that the witch's behavior had changed a lot. She had a completely different energy. If people hadn't missed many important moments beyond their ears and eyes, there could have been a completely different outcome now. When Circinia began to feel the relief of releasing her emotions, she wondered why she hadn't done it sooner. She shouldn't have endured all this, but simply burned everything, then nothing could ignore her. At that moment, they began to shout at Circinia to stop and release the man. Immediately, the witch regained consciousness and couldn't understand why her body was weakened, since she didn't remember using her powers. Circinia couldn't understand why her hands were shaking so much, because nothing had happened. But then she realized she was very angry and also felt a strong desire to kill. It was exactly the same as the day her first hut turned into a sea of fire. A strong desire to burn and kill everyone took hold of her, and the witch couldn't forget this feeling. The girls made a great effort to restrain themselves and not succumb to the evil spirit. But in the end, they couldn't hold back. She immediately noticed the shouts behind her, turned around to see what was happening there. She immediately saw a man running towards her, with a rake and shouting at her not to dare touch his son. When the rake was already flying towards her, the girl was knocked down by Ben and they flew to the ground together. Dodging the tool, the girl immediately looked at the boy and finally realized that it was her Ben. She was incredibly happy to see the boy in front of her, because if it weren't for him, it wouldn't be known what happened. At the same moment, Ben asked the witch if she dared to do something so terrible to him. After this, the bitter guy looked at the nearest man, which horrified him. Seeing the man's reaction, Ben immediately realized it was his doing, which angered him even more. Realizing the danger of the situation, the man realized it would be better to run. But the guy asked Circini to look at him. After that, Ben began to clean the blood from the girl's forehead and say that she needed medical attention. He perfectly understood that he had to protect Circinia all the time, and due to his absence, the girl turned out to be seriously injured. On this day, if he hadn't been there, what happened 3 years ago would have happened the same. The witch approached the boy and then told him she wanted to get home as soon as possible. Hearing the girl's request, Ben immediately took her in his arms and then told her he would take her to the hut. The guy was willing to make everyone who harmed his Circinia all this time pay. At that moment, news reached the village chief that Count Shorbach was exercising power outside his own territory, which enraged the man. After all, according to the laws of the empire, the lord of the territory was almost the same as the emperor in his place. These actions by Ben indicated that the guy simply ignored the government and acted illegally on his own. When the man ran towards the count, he asked why there was such a rush. He began to tell the count the whole situation, thus asking him to help calm Skorbach's powers. The man repeated that the guy acted illegally and also ignored the orders of the true ruler. The Duke remembered that this guy had recently inherited the title, but at the same time, he was not afraid of anything at all. The man was not happy because this puppy simply ignored the authority of the land's ruler. He ordered his assistant to grab Ben and told him that he would take full responsibility. The Duke couldn't allow the guy to be personally caught by him because he considered it an incredible luxury. So he sent an assistant. The man was ready to show him what happens when someone touches him. And his reign. The assistant ordered the army to capture the Archduke. He sent them to the village of La Flèche and asked them to bring the guy to him. The group commander informed the sender that he and his teams would leave immediately. At the same moment, servers from another army attacked the man and informed him that they were obliged to arrest him. He began to shout that no one dared to touch him because the man was only following the Duke's orders. Immediately, the girl told him that they were also following the order they had been given. Only their importance was greater because they were directed by the emperor. After a while, the sender was already behind bars. He couldn't believe this really happened. He began to realize that his Duke had simply abandoned the man with bad intentions, which horrified him. At that moment, people began to complain to the chief about the witch because, according to them, eventually everyone would die because of her. Suddenly, the guy who threw the stone told everyone that she was not just a witch, but a real demon. He pointed everyone to her neck, on which there was a bruise from the woman's fingers. He thought she really wanted to kill him. The chief listened to all the complaints about the woman and thought carefully about them for some time. He perfectly understood that all this was already causing him a headache and also terrible consequences for his son. A long time has passed, and the chief of the lands still has not given an answer to all the questions about what to do with the witch. At that moment, he told everyone that he could not act recklessly, because the Archduke was protecting the witch. The Count couldn't even imagine the relationship between the Archduke and the witch. But he understood that they clearly weren't simple. If his army acted carelessly, then only they and the one who sent them could suffer from this. At that moment, the army entered the office. The chief said that Dexter had sent them, after which they asked where Ben was. The Count immediately ordered his confidant to take the army to where the Archduke lived. After which the guy showed them the direction and led them. The major immediately began to perfectly understand that from now on the guy's end would come because he acted illegally. At that moment, a boy entered the room and said that he had brought tea to his master. So they let him in. The people kept talking about their plans. They wanted to finally get rid of the witch. The boy heard how they wanted to burn Circinia at the stake because she represented a great danger. There was also a plan that, as soon as the Archduke was captured, they would simply set fire to the witch's hut. After which, everyone unanimously agreed to decide on the option of burning the witch and her house in the middle of the night. The old man was ready to send news about this to the Count himself, so that after the incident, he would write that it was a normal fire. Hearing all this, the people began to praise the old man. Everyone present wanted only one thing: to punish the witch. When Ben brought Circinia back to her house, May put her to bed and began to blame herself for everything that had happened. At that same moment, the boy took the initiative and told the girl that it was not her fault at all. He hoped that everything would be fine with his Circinia and that she would soon wake up as if nothing had happened. The boy mentally asked the girl only one thing. He wanted her to finally just open her eyes. At that very moment, a knock on the door caught Ben's attention. He understood that no one should have come that day. When he looked through the door, the guy saw knights in front of him, who asked him if he was the one they were looking for. Ben immediately asked the boys who sent them, to which they replied that they were sent to inform that Dexter wanted to meet with Ben. The guy replied to the army that the Count himself could go to the meeting personally, because he didn't want to leave this place. Ben also told the boys that his decision hadn't changed and that he wouldn't repeat anything a second time. When the knights realized Ben's intentions, they immediately decided to run away from him without putting themselves in danger. Arsene immediately approached his master and handed him a letter from the imperial palace. At the same time, Circinia finally woke up. May, realizing this, attacked the girl and began to cry with emotion. The witch began to try to calm the girl down to reduce her worries, after which she added that, for the time being, everything was fine. After a while, Ben returned to the girl's room, approached her, and asked her if she was okay. Answering that everything was completely normal, Circinia moved away from Ben and announced that she was going to rest. At that very moment, Ben asked her again if everything was really okay, because he was also worried about her. Deep down, Circinia was not calm. She remembered all the terrible taunts and contemptuous glances. My head was completely filled with different thoughts, causing total chaos. But the girl perfectly understood that at that moment there were those who accompanied her, and that they would invariably remain by her side, no matter what. Circinia immediately thanked the boy for being so worried about the girl's condition, even after so long. At the same moment, Ben told the girl that it was natural for him to worry about her. He immediately drew attention to the place where the wound was, after which he said that there was a scar from the wound there. The witch began to cover this place with her curls, after which she said that this should pass soon. Suddenly, the boy realized that the witch all the time only received pain, that she constantly hid within herself. He feared that the day would come when Circinia couldn't bear it all and would simply collapse. Because of this, Ben decided to ask the witch not to take on all this burden. After all, the boy always wanted to become her sword and shield. He was ready to be used by the girl at the moment she needed it. Hearing these words, Circinia simply thanked Ben and looked away, because if she had looked at him, most likely she would have told him everything. She perfectly understood that she felt incredibly lonely because of her abilities. Precisely because of this, many were afraid of her. That's why she needed someone who would simply be there for her, who wouldn't be afraid of her because of her powers. He realized that something was wrong with Circinia, so he gently told her that everything would be fine. He was ready to do everything possible so that it would always be like this, no matter what. At night, the boy was going to stay with Circinia for a while, but she told him to go to bed. In this case, she wanted to return to the witch after a while to check if she had fallen asleep. As he headed to his room, Ben thought about how he could bring more joy to the girl. To ensure Circinia's happiness, the boy was ready to remove all obstacles that stood in his way. At that moment, the knights arrived at the witch's house again. They informed Ben that the count had arrived in the capital. When they brought the boy, a man came out of the bushes with his assistants, who prepared everything necessary to destroy the witch. The commander immediately ordered a man to pour the contents of the barrel near the house, and not hesitate. But when he refused to do this, he simply snatched the barrel from the man and said that he would do everything himself. When he heard the words that the previous village was set on fire precisely because of the witch, the man replied that it was all nonsense. Once the contents of the barrel were finished, the boss threw it back at the man, telling him that now all that was left was to set fire to everything. But at the same moment, one of the people was caught by Ben's assistants, who reported that they would have to arrest everyone. At that moment, the bewildered man began to ask the army who they were. Immediately, Arsene severely asked the man how he dared to treat the army so shamelessly, and also with that tone. When the boys also grabbed him, the man started shouting that the Archduke had left with another army for the capital. After a while, all those who participated in the attempt to set fire to the witch's house were tied up. Everyone present couldn't believe that their brilliant plan could be revealed so easily. At the same moment, the chief realized that probably someone had informed about them, after which he saw the boy who brought tea. The man immediately realized that he was the spy sent by Ern Jersog. Immediately, the man howled that he was simply following the order they had been given, after which he asked not to be touched. Arsene immediately told his people to report what had happened to Count Dexter. It was necessary to inform him that from today, he was deprived of the title of count. The emperor had previously granted Ern Duke all rights in this territory, and whoever accepted this move would have to bear the guilt of the former duke's sins. From the words, that the group leader couldn't believe that these words were true. Arsene decided to take out the paper. After which he demonstrated with the words that no one should expect the emperor with the news of salvation. What they did today would also not be ignored. After all, everyone planned the fire of a residential building, and with so many people. At the same moment, the Archduke himself arrived at the imperial army, and they began to greet the guy with a deep bow. When he asked which of these people was golden, the man began to justify himself. And his name? He immediately transferred all the responsibility to Charles, because initially it was he who threatened everyone after his own fire in the warehouse. Ben put his sword on Charles's shoulder and then told the man that he should have gotten rid of him sooner. After all, it was this man who dared to set a trap for Circinia to destroy her. Charles immediately began to ask if Ben had proof that he had really done it. At that very moment, the Archduke addressed his assistant, who was attentively waiting for the order. Charles immediately saw his own things in front of him, which horrified him because they had discovered him. His brooch and cape were there, which were found in a burned warehouse. The man was well aware of the fact that now he had no way out, because he often wore these things. Hearing the people's complaints about how the chief's son had acted, Ben asked everyone if they had anything to say. Charles began to get hysterical about the fact that he would start suffering because of a damned witch. When the man finished his sentence, Ben hit him on the shoulder with his sword, leaving a wound. After which he told him not to blame Circinia for this. At the same moment, the chief of the robbery asked the Duke to forgive all the people. He begged him for mercy, but Ben immediately replied that at that moment it was too late to ask for clemency. He also said that the one who should listen to these requests for clemency is the victim herself. The guy could have taken all their heads at once, but he wouldn't do it just for Circinia. And if the group wanted mercy, then they should have repented before the girl for all the sins associated with her. At that moment, May shouted at the witch to wake up, which the girl did. When Circinia began to open her eyes, she heard May say that outside there was too much noise. But due to her sleepy state, when the witch was finally conscious, she asked to repeat what had happened outside. May told Circinia that there were probably people gathered outside again, which made Circinia tense. The girl immediately added that she hadn't seen Ben since she woke up from all the noise. When the stunned witch stood up, she asked May not to cry, because everything was fine for them. But the only thoughts in my head were that Ben couldn't leave without saying a word. At the same moment, May suggested to her savior that they simply run away from this house, instead of the witch going out to meet people. But Circinia asked the girl to stay still and not follow her. The witch simply asked her to trust her. The girl perfectly understood that even if they ran away, May would still worry about being Circinia's companion. She didn't want to let anyone suffer even more because of her fault. She immediately went out of the house, where she saw a large crowd of people, which made her ask Ben what was happening here. At that moment, Golden began to shout at the witch that he would forgive her and forgive everything that happened. He admitted that he gave false testimony simply because Charles himself asked him to. Immediately, the witch approached the man, upon whom all the blame fell, after which she grabbed him by the neck amidst all the pleas. When Charles began to beg the girl to let him live, she was indignant because he dared to do this after all the unpleasant things. At the very same moment, those memories that were not there before came to her mind, from which she immediately let the man go. They immediately told Circinia that everyone thought of her because she was a witch, so they were going to take revenge. The representative of the people asked the girl to be generous because the usual misunderstanding had occurred. But then the witch told them that the decision to accept or not accept generosity would be theirs alone. That's why she wasn't going to accept the apology, but took the sword from Ben's hands and brandished it. If the man really wanted to repent, he would have to die. Only in this case, Circinia accepted the apology. When the sword was close to his head, Charles's pants quickly got wet, making everyone realize what had happened. Immediately, everyone began to condemn the man, because before he had behaved with great pride. But now he allowed this to happen to himself. At that moment, Circinia put away the sword and told the boy never to appear before her sight again. Otherwise, she would definitely have killed him, no matter what, after saying that. She prepared to leave. When she was with Ben, she told him that she simply didn't want to be involved with them anymore. Because the group wasn't worth it. Arsene immediately began to act. He announced that no one else could meet the witch, but would pay for their sins their whole life. Ben told Circinia that he was very sorry he couldn't help the girl sooner. At that moment, May looked outside the house. She still had tears in her eyes. But she realized that everything was fine. The witch immediately began to apologize for the fact that even May started to worry about her. But the girl said that everything happened precisely because of the people. Suddenly, Ben intervened in the conversation. He asked them if the girls had decided where they would go, after which he invited both girls to go with him to the capital and live there. He would be happy if the girls stayed with him, but she could also choose her own separate housing. May pulled the witch's sleeve and asked if they could go to the capital. The girl had never been there before, which made her very curious about how to live there. Circinia began to reason that if she stayed temporarily in the capital, this would be a good option. Since the girl had sat quietly for 3 years, the situation has changed quite a bit compared to the original. May and Ben rejoiced when the witch told them that she had accepted to go to the capital. After hearing this, Ben felt incredibly grateful to his Circinia, which caused a pleasant smile to appear on his face. In the morning, the girls were already in the capital. May was surprised how beautiful it was. At that moment, Ben watched the girls and how they were surprised by the things that were common in these places. After quite some time, the carriage arrived at Lord Shorbach's mansion and then stopped. When Circinia and May saw this mansion, they were surprised because it was huge. At first, they thought it was an imperial palace because it looked very rich. The butler immediately appeared in front of them. He greeted everyone and introduced himself to Circinia and May. Ben informed the man that the girls would stay in the palace for a while, and he also asked him to take care of them. When the three were inside, Ben invited the girl to accompany him to his room, because most likely she was tired after the trip. After which, the boy said that May's room would be located right across from the witch's room. Suddenly, Circinia asked Ben if she should call him more formally now, or not. But the boy immediately replied that she should continue calling him Ben because he really liked that name. Furthermore, if the girl needed anything, she could calmly call Ben at any time. He added so that Circinia wouldn't consider his manners rude, but Ben was happy to do what she asked. After all his words, the boy asked the witch to rest, simultaneously leaving his new room. When Circinia fell onto the bed, she noticed how soft it was, which also didn't allow her to imagine its cost. The witch understood that it had been a long time since she experienced such strong calm. At the same moment, someone knocked on the door, which made the girl sit up. A young woman immediately entered the team and politely greeted her mistress Circinia. The girl also introduced herself to the new mistress, after which she told her that, starting today, she would be her personal maid. It turned out that the maid's name was Vernet. She was ready to serve and faithfully take care of the witch. The maid had the usual dark brown hair and brown eyes, but Vernet looked neat and cute. Despite her appearance, the girl exuded a strange and noble aura. She had the feeling that on her clean and tidy head, there should be a bright crown emphasizing her aura. Immediately, the witch remembered Vernet as the wife of the crown prince. She was sitting with an expensive tiara on her head and nobly smiling at everyone. Vernet looked surprised at Circinia at that moment, and the girl remembered that she was the main protagonist of the novel. At that moment, the count's assistant asked her if an important position had made a precise decision too soon. The count's presence said that it was not worth trusting so many powers to the very young archduke. But at the same moment, the duke stopped the shouts of the crowd and then announced that the crown prince himself was right. Dexter had violated the law many times in the territory of the empire, and now he was against the emperor's punishment. The son, listening to everything his father said, perfectly understood that once the decision was made, he could simply exhale. Suddenly, the prince's assistant approached the boy and then asked him if he had finished with his business. He also said that he was personally told that the archduke himself had come to the capital. In less than a few hours, the boy was in his new place, which greatly amazed the prince. It also became known that he brought an unknown girl to the residence for no one. At that moment, the crown prince realized that Ben had mastered his desire and finally brought her. This girl was probably the one Ben was looking for so insistently. The assistant began to tell the prince not to go anywhere, because now there were many things in the palace that needed to be resolved first. But the prince said that such strong competition was a problem. There was no flexibility. At the same time, the boy perfectly understood that if he wanted to see this girl's face at least once, he would have to fix things quickly. At that moment, Vernet asked Circinia how the girl felt because she didn't look very well. The maid was very worried about the witch. She asked the mistress what was hurting her. But at that moment, Circinia remembered that in the original this maid also worked. But it was unknown where. Immediately, the girl was about to leave the room to call the doctor and the main owner himself. At that moment, Circinia was thinking that if she was somehow connected to Burnet, most likely she would die. She immediately grabbed her suitcase, thinking that she had to leave this place as soon as possible. But just as the girl wanted to leave, she ran into Ben, who excitedly asked her what was wrong. He carefully asked the newly found Circinia why she had collected so many things. Ben immediately grabbed the girl by the hand, and then told her that he had previously asked her under no circumstances to disappear without a trace. Because the boy was squeezing the girl's wrist too hard, she began to feel pain. At that moment, Ben immediately let go of the witch's hand and began to apologize to her for what he had done. For what happened, the boy thought that Circinia simply wanted revenge on him for disappearing for 3 years. But he couldn't let her go. He wanted to hug the girl, even if he had to tie her up and lock her up. All this is so that Ben doesn't have to worry that the witch will leave one day so that he can possess her completely. Suddenly, Circinia placed her hand on his cheek and then told the boy that she had no intention of going anywhere. Ben sincerely hoped that the words spoken were true. The thought spun in my head that if the guy increased his strength, the witch's wrist would break. Vern soon told the boy and the girl that since everything was in order, she would go do other things. Upon leaving, she told Circinia that the girl should not hesitate to call her, because the maid was ready to come at any time. After the servants left, Ben began to apologize to the witch again. But she immediately told him to stop doing it. She also told the boy that she felt very uncomfortable when someone served her, because the girl was used to doing everything herself. She immediately corrected herself and added that she didn't need another maid, so she didn't even have to offer it. During the last few days, Circinia hadn't been able to meet with Ben, which suggested that the boy was busy with his business. Furthermore, by the boy's order, a doctor came to Circinia every day to examine the wound on her forehead. But the witch was a little indignant that Ben was worried, but he himself couldn't come to her. When the doctor left, May told the girl that she hoped she could live here forever. But Circinia replied to May that since it was not her volume, it was impossible to stay long. She suddenly said that if the witch married Ben, then in this case they could stay here. At that moment, Circinia was surprised, after which she replied to the girl that she and Ben were like brother and sister, but all the memories associated with the boy began to pass through my head. Which made the witch think. She suddenly realized that much of her behavior was very contrary to her brother's behavior. And his sister. While Circinia walked through the palace, she thought about how nice it was for her to be with Ben. She also thought about what this relationship between a boy and a girl could be called. Suddenly, she saw strange men approach Verna. And they hugged her, while the girl told them to let her go. Circinia stopped around the corner and began to listen to the conversation. She suddenly realized that the man was talking about Vernet seducing James. But Vernet immediately began to deny this whole fact, because it wasn't even in her thoughts. Circinia began to recall the moments when she argued with Charles. The girl perfectly understood what it meant to face alone. At that very moment, the witch heard that the man was offering the girl a small payment for his business. Hearing these words, Vernet herself decided to defend herself. She attacked the man and then hit him with all her might. The fallen confidant looked at the maid from below, and at that moment she told him that at this rate he would be fired. Seeing what Vernet was doing, Circinia began to remember that in the original the girl had a completely different character. The one who was hit by the maid got up and started insulting the girl, about to even hit her. But at that moment, Circinia herself grabbed the man by the neck, scaring him and stopping him. Vernet, seeing her mistress, was very surprised by what the girl was doing, as she seemed helpless. The witch immediately began to tell the men that they were behaving very ugly and vile, attacking a girl. Suddenly, one of them said that Circinia misunderstood everything because she only saw one part of what was happening. Since Circinia was not local, she couldn't know much about these places. As the man said, it was quite normal to maintain discipline among common servants in this way. At that moment, Circinia asked the man if his job was to intimidate a single girl in a group. But one of them replied that it was also that nothing could stain the Archduke's face. Suddenly, Circinia immediately squeezed the man's shoulders and asked him about the fact that he hadn't opened his mouth to anyone. At that moment, the exhausted man began to ask Circinia to let him go and stop the harassment. The witch simply began to smile, after which she withdrew one of her hands and told the man to answer the question posed to him. After this, Circinia turned to Verna and asked what she would like to do with these people. If a girl wanted to hit men, like recently, she could calmly do it, because now nothing would happen to her. Circinia added that she would take full responsibility, so Burnett could allow herself at least something. The maid thanked her mistress for what she had done, after which she began to feel embarrassed. Suddenly Circinia threateningly asked the men for their names, after which they couldn't help but do it, from which they introduced themselves. After this, the witch sent the men to deal with their business, at which moment the three of them immediately fled. Vernet also bowed to Circinia and informed her that it was time to do the work she was assigned. Suddenly, Circinia asked the maid why she was letting the men go unpunished so easily. After all, recently, she was in the mood to fight with all of them. But now it turned out this way. Due to Vernet's long silence, Circinia said that if the girl didn't want to talk, then she couldn't do it. At that moment, the maid immediately told the mistress that she had to continue dealing with them because she let them go, which Circinia didn't understand. Circinia immediately realized that firing these people would change nothing. What was happening now would repeat itself. Baron told the witch that leaving alone wouldn't be an option either, because now she was earning money for her mother's medicine. Tears began to spring from the maid's eyes. She perfectly understood that she would have to work here anyway. Understanding the maid's situation, the witch decided at least to give her a handkerchief so she could wipe away her tears. When the girl began to wipe away her tears, Circinia realized that she was talking about medicine. In the original, the reason for the need for medicine was that the mother suffered many burns, and the medicines helped reduce the pain. Since the girl took the place of the evil Circinia, the original plot had to radically change. At the same time, Circinia asked Vernet what her mother suffered from and if she needed medicine. Vernet replied to the girl that her mother had severe burns and that without medicine, she simply couldn't live normally without pain. Circinia was horrified when she learned about the severe burns because none of that could have happened. It transpired that some time ago Vernet returned home and saw her mother lying on the floor with burns and unconscious. Hearing the continuation of Burnet's story, Circinia began to sway, so she had to lean her elbows on the wall. Seeing that Madame Circinia felt unwell, Berna immediately ran to her and began to worry about her condition. Circinia replied to her that everything was in order, she was just dizzy. But in her mind, Circinia understood that her evil spirit couldn't do anything that was in the original. So the mother should be fine. The girl couldn't understand why everything was flowing according to the original and nothing was changing. Burnett asked Circinia to simply lean on her so that the servant could help her. In the original, Burnett escaped from the slave traders and started working at the end of autumn. Suddenly, the girl told the mistress that her complexion was very bad and that she should rest. When both girls were in Circinia's room, Vernet brought her a blanket. and asked her if she needed to call a doctor. Circinia, sitting, told her maid that everything was fine with her now and that nothing was required of her. Suddenly, the girl asked the maid if she wanted to be with Circinia again. At first, Vernet couldn't understand what the lady meant, so she asked her again in a way that was more understandable to her. The witch apologized to the girl, after which she told her that it was difficult for her to be alone at that moment. After which, she affectionately asked if the maid could help her with everything again. Vernet was the main character of the novel and would definitely be the center of attention again. Now Circinia's life was very different from before, but the maid's mother still suffered burns. The witch told the girl that she herself would ask Verna to change jobs. So she had nothing to worry about. After agreeing on both, the girls agreed to help each other in all necessary situations. The girl hoped as much as possible that her decision was one of the best she could choose. At that moment, Ben was sitting with his papers, and while working on them, he was informed that 2 days had already passed since he had been in the palace. Arsene asked the boy why he wasn't returning home, or why he couldn't rest properly. He also said about Circinia that if she smeared the wound with medicine, the scar would soon disappear. Ben was incredibly happy that his Circinia was getting better every day. But he also had an incredible fear that one day she would lose her mind again and hurt the girl. At that moment, Arsene told his master that he was worried about her future condition. Suddenly, he asked Ben if something might have happened between him and Circinia that had such an impact on the boy. When the knight turned dissatisfiedly towards his assistant, Arsene realized that his question was unnecessary. But Ben simply told the boy that he should have prepared his things for tomorrow's inspection trip. When Arsene left, Ben began to think about how he kept away from the girl so as not to hurt her. But his desire to lock the witch in his hands never disappeared, and due to his obsession, the boy was disgusted with himself. Despite all these facts, Ben still terribly missed his first time with Circinia. After a while, 3 girls went to the capital's central market, where their eyes opened at the variety of things. Circinia told Verna that if she wanted to see something, she couldn't be embarrassed at all. When the maid heard and understood that she was being given time off work, her eyes began to shine. The witch looked around and realized that since the village of Mulan, for example, most of the goods were sent here. When the girls approached the stand with ornaments, Vernet was delighted with such beautiful things. When Circinia looked at her, she understood that the girl had lived here for so long, but was very surprised. It was for this reason that she decided to ask the girl if this was her first time here, which turned out to be true. The maid replied that she had been trying to earn money since she was little, and that's why she never went to the market. When Circinia apologized for her question, Vernet immediately started saying that everything was fine. At that moment, the witch burst into flames, and in her voice one could hear a determined resolve to have a lot of fun here. May immediately ran to different shops, and the maid tried to stop her so the girl wouldn't fall. At that moment, Circinia heard talk of precious stones, which greatly attracted her. She realized that the man was trying to sell one of his best stones to a rich woman. The woman was unsure of the value of this stone, but the man did everything possible to convince her otherwise. He showed her the glow of his jewel, justifying it with the fact that he was definitely real. According to the man, in a jewelry store they would ask for more than 5 million schlings for this stone. But luckily, the woman ended up in his shop, and that's why the guy was willing to give away the stone for 2 million. Suddenly, Circinia approached them. She accurately named the stone, which frightened the stall owner. She also added that the more transparent the blood rose spinel, the greater its value. The girl mockingly added that a stone like the guy's wouldn't even sell in jewelry stores because it's very murky. He began to say that Circinia was talking nonsense, thus trying to keep his customer. But the girl told the woman that if she went to several jewelry stores, she would check for herself that the words were true. Among those presented by this stone, which the guy showed, this was the one with the lowest price. The woman realized that from now on, she should avoid buying suspicious things in unknown places. She wanted to call her guards to help her check the value of this stone. But at that moment, the woman decided to thank Circinia for helping her and not walking past. In her head, the girl understood that now she should no longer flaunt her name. That's why she didn't want to name it. After which, she simply set off to leave the woman, first informing her that it wouldn't be difficult to help her. At that moment, she realized that it was Circinia, who was starting to interest her more and more in herself. When the witch was looking for Bernad and May, an unknown person followed her. But the girl didn't notice. Soon the girl was already with her friends. She asked them if they liked the walk. The girl, cheerful and admiring, told her savior that the capital was incredibly beautiful. After the positive responses from the girls, Circinia told them both that from now on they would go out more often. But there were many questions in my head about why Ben couldn't go out in front of others, even though he was in the mansion. She had also heard before that he was in a small mansion that was used as a warehouse. Burnett also didn't know where the master was, but she knew that Arsene visited his lordship every morning. May asked the witch if something might have happened to the Archduke during this time. Furthermore, Circinia didn't know if Ben might have left her and simply gone to another palace for a while. She began to realize that Ben disappeared precisely after the day she wanted to leave, as if avoiding her. At that moment, Circinia is very surprised by Vernet's words that the girl and the Archduke were dating. May asked the maid what she had just said because she couldn't believe what she heard. After that, she turned to the witch and asked when her relationship with Ben had progressed so much. At that moment, Burnett realized that she was very wrong, so she began to apologize to Circinia. She explained her thought by the fact that many people said that the boy and the girl were dating. That's why she thought so. Suddenly, Circinia stood up from her seat and said that she needed to go out to the terrace for a while. Burnett began to blame herself for ruining everything again with her unnecessary words. But May began to calm her down. The maid covered her face with her hands and said that she really didn't know they weren't in a relationship. That day, when Madame Circinia fell ill and the girl informed her master, the man immediately set aside all his affairs and ran to her. Anyone could think that this is how a man who is worried about his beloved acts. At that moment, the witch stood up and thought about what turned out to be some rumors she was not aware of. She didn't want to justify herself every day and deny the rumor that she and Ben were not a couple. The witch began to get angry because at that moment she wasn't worried about her future, but for Ben's beloved, who wasn't there yet. At that moment, the girl saw several more people behind her and was indignant because she was simply going to stay alone. When the girls started talking about the Archduke and his illness, Circinia didn't understand what they were talking about. She suggested that the illness they were talking about was related to the wounds on the boy's back. The ladies talked about how he had been in a hospital room since he was a child, which didn't make it strange that he fainted again. Hearing this news, Circinia was very surprised, as she didn't understand what the girls were talking about. But when Ben returned completely healthy for the Crown Prince's birthday, all the people were surprised. Circinia couldn't even imagine that she and the girls were referring to the same person. She knew Ben as a man who lived alone with his mother and who ended up living as a slave for several years. Ben, who abruptly disappeared from Circinia in the end, appeared before her as an archduke. It seemed that the dukedom was intentionally spreading rumors about Ben's past. Most likely this was done because the past of a slave would not be compatible with the title of archduke. At that moment, Circinia heard the girls start discussing the fact that Ben had brought a girl with him to the mansion. They talked about how the duke himself personally accompanied her and then even ordered the servants to take care of her. The ladies wondered if anyone knew what family this girl was from, which surprised Circinia. She heard that the girls started assuming the witch was just an ordinary commoner. The girls desperately wanted to see the face of this girl he brought to the mansion, and Circinia already wanted to show herself to them. But after that, she realized it wasn't worth it, so she decided to simply leave so that no one would see her. Circinia returned to the maid and May asked them how long they waited for her, to which she received a negative answer. The witch told May what the terrace was like, which made the girl want to look at it even more. When the girl slipped away, she hoped the other girls could discuss the situation because Vernet was very depressed. Suddenly, the witch asked the maid what she had heard about the Duke's childhood, to which she replied that he had been sick his entire childhood. It was also because of his illness that the boy never appeared in secular society. Upon hearing the testimony, Circinia began to convince herself that this illness was just a trick for the people. 6 months ago, when the Archduke finally recovered, that day they abruptly changed all the servants for others. It was then that all the former workers were fired, thus making way for new workers. But Ben said that he was brought to the dukedom 3 years ago, so the servants should have been replaced even earlier. It would be strange to hide a boy from the servants, let alone receive lessons as a recipient. It also turned out that the butler Morgan, like everyone else here, started working recently. Although at first glance it might not seem so. The previous butler served the former duke, but retired due to poor health. Suddenly, Vernet remembered that it was Arsene who now worked most for the Archduke. After hearing a hint from Vernet, Circinia decided that she needed to meet with Ben's assistant as soon as possible. As the witch was heading for a meeting with Arsene, she was watched by a stranger who had been looking for the girl for a long time. A few days later, Circinia continued to search for clues related to Ben. The girl obediently questioned all the palace servants, but they also didn't know anything about it. She reasoned that since no one could give her an answer to her question, then Arsene was really the last one left. A week has passed since Ben disappeared from his own palace, and the boy has still not shown himself to the girl. As the butler told the witch, Ben and Arsene went to explore the territory together. At that moment, Circinia remembered how the boy himself had previously told her all his plans. Which was not the case now. The girl was indignant that Ben couldn't even return home, not even to eat normal food. The witch understood that with high probability she could appear to him at least for a short time. But suddenly, she realized that she had no reason to think about such things because she was not Ben's wife or girlfriend. Circinia considered herself crazy because she was losing her mind over such thoughts, which only angered her. At that moment, the weather began to get colder and colder, and autumn was slowly coming to an end. During this period in the original novel, the crown prince was supposed to and Vernet meet. Their meeting happened suddenly. The prince was simply exploring the capital, but at one point he had to save the girl from danger. Suddenly Circinia saw how the butler rejected the request of an unknown girl. But the man replied to the beautiful young lady that he would simply pass on the information to Ern Jursag himself. Aronia was a beautiful and pleasant girl. She was noble and well-mannered. Circinia noticed that at one point the aristocrat looked at her, thus confusing the girl. After which, he immediately went on to converse with the butler and informed him that it was time to leave. At that moment, Circinia approached him and asked who this girl was in general. Merchin introduced Aronia and also informed the witch that she was the only daughter of Bleswin. It could also be her, who is quietly competing to become his lordship's future wife. When the man started moving away from Circinia, she began to suspect that something was wrong with the man's behavior. But the girl perfectly understood that she had only been in the mansion for a week. So she couldn't become a close person so quickly. He was well aware of the fact that apart from Ben, no one was happy to see her there. Circinia was a stranger to most. That's why the witch believed that it would be much better and easier for her to live alone and not stick her head out anywhere. At that very moment, Berna appeared. The maid was incredibly happy to see her mistress, so she approached her. It turned out that she thought, due to the reason for Circinia's long absence, that the witch was simply lost. At that moment, Ben asked Arsene how many days the universally favorite harvest festival was supposed to take. It was a feast where everyone thanked the land for its harvest, after which they prayed for its prosperity for the coming year. After the Duke learned the date, he told the assistant that if anything was needed for the festival, then it had to be taken care of. Suddenly, the boy began to notice the surprised looks of the people looking at him, after which he realized that people felt uncomfortable seeing the Lord. When Ben went to a quiet place, he began to reflect on the fact that he hadn't seen his Circinia in 10 days. He understood that the more he didn't see her now, the more he began to miss the girl. But he couldn't stop thinking about her either, which only worsened his condition. Ben covered his face with his hands and said quietly that he missed Circinia very much. Suddenly, a strong motivation came to his head, which made him decide to see the witch as soon as possible. At that moment, the boy ran into his assistant, who informed him what he had done today. But Ben didn't listen to Arsene about this. The guy simply jumped on his horse and prepared to leave. When he was at his palace, the servants immediately decided to serve the master. But he said that there was no need to do it now. A couple of minutes later, Ben was already near Circinia's room. He stood in front of her and began to wonder if the girl was already asleep. But when he opened the door, he realized that there wasn't even a witch spirit in her own room, which was surprising. At that very moment, Ben panicked because the witch had decided to disappear again without even saying a word. But suddenly, the boy heard footsteps behind him, so he decided to turn around, after which he saw Circinia in front of him. Ben couldn't understand why the girl wasn't in her room, after which he gently took her by the shoulder and felt the warmth. He immediately calmed down upon realizing that the witch hadn't left him, so he hugged the girl. After a while, the Duke carefully laid Circinia in her room on a soft bed. Ben understood that the girl hadn't changed in any way since the last time he saw her. She was also beautiful. The boy considered the witch to be that incredibly charming person, which is why it was impossible not to love her. But he also perfectly understood that he couldn't continue to be close to the girl because he was afraid of hurting her. Ben took Circinia's hand and carefully said that he was very afraid of losing her and hurting her in some way. At the same moment, he noticed that the witch began to open her eyes, which slightly frightened Ben. The girl woke up upon hearing a voice that was familiar and intimate to her, after which she saw the boy himself. Suddenly, she asked him if it was precisely out of fear of hurting her that Ben was avoiding Circinia. She asked the boy to tell her exactly why he was trying so hard to avoid meetings. When Ben replied that he couldn't be sure that Circinia hadn't been hurt. Therefore, he didn't give an exact answer. Suddenly, Circinia told the boy that she was not one of those who should be protected in difficult times. But at that moment, Ben corrected himself and added that he simply feared that his own desires would overwhelm the girl. The Duke covered his face with his hands, after which he began to think that he could not contain his growing desires. He was afraid to imagine the girl's reaction to the fact that he was ready to leave her by his side, even if he had to break her wings. Suddenly, the witch reminded Ben that no one could touch her because of her abilities. After uttering the words, the witch asked the boy to simply turn around and look at her. When he turned to the girl, she immediately asked him if he looked so much like someone easy to bend. From the moment, the boy smiled at her on the pier and told her he wanted to be together. Ben became Circinia's salvation. Suddenly, the girl told the Duke that she knew perfectly well that he couldn't harm her in any way. And if this suddenly happened, Circinia wouldn't even think of starting to despise the boy. That's why she asked the boy not to be afraid of what hasn't happened yet, because for now, it makes no sense. When Ben saw the fire coming out of Circinia's hands, he immediately realized that all his antics were foolishness. The witch always had the strength to defend herself and could calmly treat her wounds. At that moment, Circinia asked Ben why he was avoiding her if he had brought her here before. Ben told the witch that he just wanted to be greedy, to which he received the expected answer. Suddenly, he took Circinia's hand and tenderly confessed his feelings to her, thus surprising her. After which, the Duke told the girl that since it was late, he would no longer disturb her sleep. Ben's confession hung in the air from that moment, but he knew that if he wanted to hear sincerity, he didn't need to rush. That's why the boy suggested to the girl to have breakfast together the next morning if she had no plans. When Ben left, Circinia fell onto the bed on her back and covered her face with her hands. She was very embarrassed and flabbergasted by the boy's confession. She tried by all means possible to bring her thoughts back to normal, but she couldn't do it. At that moment, a man approached his commander and apologized for returning so late from an errand. Suddenly, the woman told her subordinate that she had seen quite enough today. Because she saw a completely healthy Circinia, she couldn't look at her calmly. She wanted to take everything away from the girl. In the morning, Vernet entered the witch's room. The lady asked her to inform Ben that she couldn't come to breakfast. After the maid left, Circinia began to reason that avoiding the boy was not an option now. She was tormented by many questions, but the most important one was why Ben liked her so much since when. She decided to delve into her memories, where the boy constantly smiled tenderly at the girl, making her heart race. Previously, the witch hadn't even imagined that Ben might like her, even though he had said countless times that he wanted to be together. The boy tried to stay close, even after becoming an archduke, which made Circinia not understand how she hadn't realized this before. The witch realized that she was simply pretending not to know or understand anything, thus making her life easier. Most likely, she did this out of her own fear that their relationship would worsen in the future. But for the witch now was not the time to play love, as the original plot had already begun. For the time being, she could not allow herself to give her heart to someone. At that moment, Ben knocked on the door and asked if he could come in to see her right now. Circinia said she needed time, after which she immediately ran to wash and get ready. When she was almost ready, she stood in front of the mirror and wondered if she should have put on lipstick now. But immediately, she regained her senses and started getting angry because she started worrying too much about how to appear better in front of Ben. The witch abandoned her desire to put on makeup and simply walked to the door, after which a well-dressed duke entered the room. The moment Circinia saw the boy, she thought why he looked so handsome today. He suddenly informed his beloved girl that, due to the upcoming holiday, he wanted to spend it with her. Thus, he asked for a date, but immediately added that if the witch didn't want to, she could simply refuse. Due to the girl's long silence, Ben assumed that she was refusing, after which he decided to leave. But Circinia stopped him. She immediately told Ben that she had agreed to go with him to the next harvest festival. The boy immediately turned around, and the girl started to assume that if she hadn't taken his hand, he would have walked away. A little surprised, Ben smiled tenderly at Circinia and then gently squeezed her thin hand. The next morning, May and Vernet woke the girl up, and the witch had to get up early reluctantly. They kept telling Circinia that she needed to start right away to have time to get properly ready. The witch immediately regretted telling the girls that she was going to the holidays with Ben himself. After a while, the maid told Circinia that she simply looked beautiful in those outfits. After this, May added that the Archduke announced that he would be waiting for her at the door. When Circinia approached the boy, it was impossible to take her eyes off him, which greatly embarrassed the witch. As soon as she was about to go down to the boy, she stumbled, which made her fly towards Ben. But he caught her. After a while, Circinia and the Archduke arrived at the village where the festival was held. When the boy offered his hand to the witch to help her, she was lost in thoughts that she needed to reject Ben somehow. But also in the last moments, she wanted to forget about everything and enjoy the holidays at all costs. The girl was quite surprised when she saw a large number of people arriving at the square. At the same moment, Ben called the girl and offered her candied fences. Such a gift was only made in this village. Some fruits were simply covered with sweet syrup, and then all that was left was to wait for it to harden. Embarrassed, Circinia took the gift and thanked Ben, then informed him that it was really delicious. Suddenly, the boy told the girl that she had gotten messy, and then carefully wiped the syrup from her face, thus embarrassing her. And Ben noticed that the finger with which he touched the girl's lips became too hot. Sometime later, the boy threw his jacket at the witch and told her that it was quite cool today. He was only worried that Circinia might get sick due to today's walk, so he decided to take care of her. A large bonfire would be lit in the square at night. Thus celebrating a great ceremony, Ben asked Circinia if she would mind going there. In theory, if they went there, they would only return at dawn, but the witch didn't know what to answer. After a while, Circinia noticed the bracelets and immediately pointed them out to Ben. At that moment, the salesman began to admire the boy and the girl, because they chose the right colors for each other. These bracelets would be perfect for both of them as a gift for each other. Circinia told Ben that she liked both bracelets, so she told the boy to choose them himself. Hearing these words, the Archduke told the girl that in this case he was ready to blush. At that moment, the Crown Prince was indignant because as soon as the work was over, he found out that the two he was looking for had simply gone to the festival. When the assistant asked the knight if he wanted to return to the palace because of this act, the prince replied negatively. After a while, the boy focused his attention on an item made by a professional from the village of Bryant. After which he turned to Eric and told him that they had to buy this, even though the prince had many such things. When the man began to try to contradict the prince, he said that in this case it was worth buying another wardrobe. At the same moment, he noticed that a group of men was again following a girl. It was Vern. The men were threatening her again, and moreover, no one could help the girl, which benefited these people. One of them began to shout that, because of the maid, the entire trio had to suffer for several days. The prince watched, horrified, what these men were willing to do to the girl. The company leader ordered the others to arrest Vernet. Immediately, the heir rushed to the maid's aid, began to shout at the men that with their actions they only showed their special status. When the men started attacking him, he easily defended the aggressors, and also told them to attack all at once and not waste time. After the heir easily knocked down all the men, he said that his assumption turned out to be correct because of his deceptive masculinity. After a few seconds, he said that the three men would have 3 seconds to leave here unharmed if they failed to do so. All the torture would turn in circles. While the three fled, Burnett shyly thanked the boy for what he had just done for her. Suddenly, she asked the girl about the relationship between her and Circinia, whom she so wanted to see. Burnett couldn't understand how this guy knew Circinia, because she didn't make her name shine in the capital. When Burnett told him that she wasn't obliged to answer the boy, because she mistrusted him. But she tried to continue the conversation calmly, so she asked the boy why he needed the witch. At night, when Ben and Circinia sat quietly and waited for the main concert to begin, preparations for the stage began. But the witch's attention was focused on the bracelet she had bought that day. Moreover, the more she looked at it, the more it reminded her of Ben due to its dark tones. Due to the fact that she spent more and more time with the boy, it became harder for her to refuse him. Circinia madly did not want to lose and simply abandoned the connection that was so precious to her. And Ben, what she feared most was that if she suddenly rejected him, she might never see him again. At that moment, the show participants came out to the people. They had lit torches in their hands. The performance began, as well as the sacrifice ceremony in thanks to the land. Because of the sight of fire, the witch began to feel worse and worse. Horror began to read in her eyes, and memories of imminent death began to run through her head. Ben himself realized this. He immediately told the girl that she had turned pale, which made him panic. She began to reject the boy's assumptions about what could have happened to her. But with every second, things became more difficult for the girl. At the same moment, the Archduke told Circinia that they would have to urgently leave the concert. After which he again asked her what had happened together. But the witch couldn't answer this question. She felt perfectly that she was getting goosebumps from the desire to kill. At the same time, an insensitive female voice sounded in her head, the sensation of which made her nervous. She also remembered her smile, which lit up the girl's face during the moment when the Viscount almost died from the fire. And also the face of the one who, standing in the center of the square where the Thanksgiving festival was taking place, was smiling covered in blood. Circinia was the person who could cause darkness and horror with just one look. The girl couldn't understand where she was, and where that same malice of Circinia had already begun. She was very afraid that at some point, her evil essence might manifest again. Circinia also feared that in her unconscious state, she might somehow harm Ben himself. Suddenly, despite her fear, the witch turned to the boy, to which he reacted quickly, and took her hands. At the same moment, the Archduke told the girl that he really wanted to help her somehow. Besides protecting her, to fulfill his desire, he needed an appropriate position. That's why he wanted to spend the future with her. Suddenly, the saddened witch took her hands away from his, looked away. and told the boy that she did not share his feelings. When she saw Ben's saddened face, her heart bled profusely from pity and the shame of what she had done. Ben asked her why she couldn't be with him, or she could have simply waited for the right moment. But the girl perfectly understood that she couldn't feel uncomfortable in front of such a guy. After several subsequent requests, the witch gave a final negative answer, also saying that this was not up for discussion now. But Ben couldn't understand why the witch was doing this, because she never looked in the direction of the other girls. He leaned on the witch's shoulder and began to beg her to give him some time to finally accept him. The Archduke burst into tears so that the girl would at least not suddenly disappear, as she might have done before. But she simply took the boy's jacket, gave it to him, and told him it was time for them to leave. In the morning, the girl thought about how sad Ben's face was, which made her feel incredibly embarrassed. She mentally asked the Archduke if he could take care of himself after what happened. At the same moment, Burnett entered the ladies' room and said she was worried about her because of her bad look. The maid suggested that the condition of being Cinia worsened a lot after the festival, because she had felt unwell before. But the witch said that everything was in perfect order and that she was going out for a walk anyway, because the weather outside was nice. At the same time, she asked Burnett if she wanted to go for a walk with her. When they went out, the maid was very eager to ask what happened to the girl. And the knight, but realizing that this matter might end badly, simply informed the witch that the Duke would leave for business today. Sir Cinia suggested that Ben couldn't return to his house because he was afraid of causing trouble for the witch. But he could also arrive calmly, because this palace was his home and the girl was just a guest. Soon the girls arrived at a place where they could have a snack and drink tea. The maid said she would immediately bring sweets. When she left them behind, the witch thought about when it would be best for her to leave this palace. But in my head was the thought that Ben had asked her before, or rather, that she shouldn't leave him without saying a word. She also thought that the girl never found out what kind of scars he had on his back, which Ben didn't want to talk about. Immediately, Sarisnia saw Arsene approaching her. He approached and asked if he could sit next to her. When he sat down across from her, the witch thought why he decided to sit right there. Because the guy wasn't even looking for her. Suddenly, she told Arsene that she had already heard a lot about the upcoming trip, as well as about his employment. But at the very same moment, Ben's assistant became more serious towards the girl, misinterpreting her. He informed the witch that recently something incomprehensible had started to happen to her master, because he had stopped eating normally. Arsene understood that it was a shame to say this, but he asked the girl to help the knight with this. But suddenly, Sir Cinia told Arsene that at that moment it was no longer in her power, no matter what she did. At that moment, the assistant told her that he considered himself a sinner, because above all, he wanted his master's happiness. He was also incredibly ashamed that he was the one who had kidnapped the guy several years ago. So now he would serve him forever. At that moment, Sir Cinia began to recall Ben's words that he was kidnapped by a man who served the Archduke. Sir Cinia told Arsene that all the true information about Ben was hidden behind his illness in the spring. After which, the girl asked why they took him back to the dukedom, because he was a slave. The witch also focused Arsene's attention very well on the fact that she saw many scars on Ben's back. But after learning the latest news, the assistant said that he no longer had the right to inform the girl about anything. Since Arsene was his lordship's man, he had no right to reveal any information about him without permission. Sir Cinia, understanding the whole situation, told the assistant that in that case she would not ask anything more. After that, the boy thanked her, and again asked her to think about his impudent request. It turned out that Ben wanted to return to the girl every day, but Arsene couldn't do anything about it. When he began to leave the witch, her head was filled with thoughts about what happened to Ben at that time. The memories were most likely very painful. That's why he hid them. Before leaving, she wanted to know what happened to Ben and also help in any way she could. After a while, Vernet and Sir Cinia tried to find at least some information. But they couldn't find anything. At the same moment, when the girls were leaving the first place, someone called Circinia, which surprised both girls. Vernet, when she saw the person who called, was very surprised, because she couldn't expect such a turn of events. She suddenly told the witch that now the best thing would be for the girls to run away as fast as possible. She was ready to explain the whole situation later, but now they needed to get to safety. At that moment, the boy asked both girls if he really looked that repulsive. When the witch began to examine him, she realized that the boy's face looked quite familiar to her. But she couldn't understand who it was. But then she realized how luxurious this boy's clothes were, after which she immediately realized that the crown prince himself was now standing in front of her, so she immediately bowed before him. At that moment, he asked how the witch herself could know the prince since she had never been to the capital before. But then he asked how many people in the empire could wear the coat of arms on their clothes. Suddenly, Bernay fell to her knees in front of the prince and began to beg for forgiveness, because she simply didn't recognize his majesty. Circinia asked the maid to calm down, because the crown prince himself announced that he had forgiven the girl. A few minutes later, the boy told the girl that he would like both of them to pay him a little attention. Surprised and also a little tense, Circinia looked at him attentively and prepared to listen to the prince. At that moment, Ben was walking along the shore of a wonderful lake, where the sun flooded everything with its bright rays. It shone just like his beloved Circinia, which made Ben want to come to this place with her. Looking at his reflection in the water, Ben thought about how much longer he would be so strongly attached to the witch. Suddenly, Arsene himself ran up to him, hurrying to inform him of some news. At the same time, he informed the Duke that the crown prince himself had arrived at Ben's mansion. And most likely the first thing the heir did was meet with Madame Circinia. That's why panic began. At the same moment, the witch and the heir were already sitting at the table and drinking tea, slowly talking about each other. Circinia sat down and wondered why Rematius Belful had gone to Ernduck's palace. Moreover, the girl couldn't believe that she was now sitting and calmly drinking tea with someone who could easily destroy her. The heir told the girl that he had heard a lot about her thanks to the Archduke. When the boy asked her how the situation in the village was resolved, the girl was very surprised. It turned out that Ben approached him at dawn and immediately began to threaten him, because the ruler had no time to deal with the matter. He asked the girl if she knew that Count Dexter was simply stripped of his title because of what happened. No one, except the emperor, had power over the ruler of a foreign territory. And this was also punishable. What the Archduke did could be considered as a blatant declaration of war on the rulers of the territory. Circinia understood that Count Dexter, who was deprived of his title in time, simply noted the fact of Ben's future punishment. Moreover, it was most likely the heir who organized and took care of everything that happened in the village. After all, with only the power of the Archduke, Ben simply wouldn't have been able to carry out his whole plan. For Circinia, it was just an unpleasant memory until that moment. She hadn't even thought about its severity. At the same time, Belfar said that now this didn't interest him as much as the girl herself. Immediately, an angry Ben appeared next to them, who immediately stopped the heir, also very angry with him. It turned out that the crown prince came to the dukedom for one reason only, all because of his interest in seeing Cerisnia. Suddenly, Ben asked the girl to make room for him, because he wanted to talk to Belfar about some things. At that moment, Circinia asked the boy not to do anything serious, and then left the two of them. A few seconds later, Ben again asked the crown prince more sternly what he had forgotten here. Belfar noticed that the Archduke clearly had no intention of discussing the name Circinia had given him. Suddenly, the boy said that he was ready to talk about the witch, although he did not expect that the Duke had such high standards. At that moment, Ben, now calm, said what he had previously warned the heir more than once, that he shouldn't even look in Circinia's direction. Belfar said that he was not interested in other people's women, and then asked why he was hiding her so strongly. The crown prince stated that this kind of hiding behavior could have serious consequences in the future. Any envious person could easily point at this girl, thus putting something more than herself at risk. Suddenly, Ben asked Abel Far how he should accept these words, but the interlocutor replied that it was only concern. The heir asked Ben where Verdict was, since he only knew Merchant before. The old butler was detained. He was in the most impassable place, from where there was definitely no way out. Belfar noted that lately the Duke had been very pale, despite living in the flower garden. But he himself seemed to be drying up. Because Ben did not want to answer the question of what happened to him, the heir simply told him to contact him if anything happened. The next morning, Burnett told the mistress that she needed to go to the store, at which moment the witch could sit in a cafe. After the girl left, Circinia began to think about the maid's words about what the crown prince had done for her on the day of the festival. Although the details were radically different, overall, the fact of their first meeting was the same as in the original novel. After the meeting, the story should have begun to develop much faster, which was bad for the witch. That's why the girl had to deal with everything as quickly as possible to then leave the capital. When the witch was in the cafe, she was annoyed that she couldn't get the information she needed from the aristocrats' conversations. At that moment, she had to think where she should go to get more of what she needed. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a news agency, which she wanted to go to in order to find out what interested her. At that moment, a person unknown to her touched her, to which Circinia immediately drew attention and began to act. She grabbed the man's hand and began to ask him who he was. When the man took off his hood, the witch immediately realized that it was the crown prince. After which, she immediately let go of the boy's hand and apologized for considering him suspicious, which made her rude. Belfar informed Circinia that he could provide her with all the information she needed. After all, she couldn't have found better information skills anywhere else but from him. He knew any information, even that which was outside his territory of governance. For example, about Shorbach. Circinia thanked the boy for his help, but told him that she would be forced to refuse this offer. Suddenly, the heir asked the girl not to use news agencies under any circumstances so as not to waste money. Since the girl hadn't entered the building yet, Belfar was ready to give her some information. He told the sister that there was a secret place in the Archduke's house that was difficult to penetrate. It was a very deep and dark place, hidden from human eyes. That's why the difficulties arose. At the same moment, Circinia asked the heir why he was telling her all this. If the girl had trusted him, she would have immediately understood how true the prince's words were. After that, he told Circinia that he had to leave, since the same lady who had been with her before was not around. Suddenly, Circinia blurted out that her maid had gone to the store to buy some things. Belfar asked the witch where the girls had agreed to meet after she returned from the store. When Circinia got into the heir's carriage, her thoughts were filled with how the relationship between the prince would develop. And Burnett. She immediately realized how, somehow, unintentionally, she got caught in this whole picture between lovers. The atmosphere between the crown prince and Burnett became sweeter with every minute, even though they had only recently met. The next day, Circinia and the rest of the girls went in search of the secret room. The witch tried to understand, based on the heir's words, where approximately this place could be located. A deep and dark place in the mansion definitely had to be something like a dungeon. Wherever the three girls looked for something similar to what was described, no one could find anything at all. Circinia also wanted to despair and believe that the crown prince was simply lying to her. Suddenly, the girl suggested that the others split up and search for the passage separately, because this way they would find it faster. But at the same time, she still hoped that in this way she wouldn't waste time continuing her search. At that moment, when she was walking in front of the hall door, she saw Aronia Blengion standing inside, which surprised her a little. She immediately saw that Ben himself was with the girl, which made the witch wonder what they were doing there without the servants. And after that, I realized that Aronia was trying to smile as cheerfully as possible in front of the Archduke. Circinia was interested to know if Ben knew how deceptive and unpleasant this aristocrat was. Suddenly, she started thinking why she started being interested in this, because she had rejected Ben. Since she did this, such behavior on her part was childish, which is why the girl shouldn't have done this. When the witch looked at the girl, she wondered what the boy and the girl were talking about. But then Circinia realized that it was better to observe Ben's reaction to understand the approximate gist of the conversation. At the same moment, May approached the witch from behind, so she was very frightened by the unexpected approach. The girl asked her surprisedly if she had been spying on the Duke and the aristocrat. When May looked towards the gap with Circinia, she saw Aronia there, so she began to smile very mischievously. Suddenly, the witch noticed the way Ernduk was smiling, so disappointed she told him to leave with her. At that moment, Ben stood up and noticed that someone was standing outside the door. Or passing by. The boy also clearly heard a girl calling Circinia. He suddenly noticed that the witch's own scent remained in the hallway. After a couple of minutes, the Duke returned to his conversation with Aronia, which made her ask him what happened. When Ben sat down across from the girl, she immediately saw how the Duke's face changed. It became indifferent again. What she immediately remembered was that when the topic of the bracelet came up, Ben smiled at least a little. For the first time in his life, Aronia could see such a bright and sincere smile on Ernduk. At this point, she decided to bring up the topic of the bracelet again and told the boy that she was very surprised to learn that he wore bracelets. But at that very moment, she simply received a refusal from Ben to talk. He told her to go home. When both girls were already in their rooms, May asked Serisnia why she broke her pen. After which, she carefully began to joke with the witch by telling her that she was angry because Ben smiled at another girl. After many repeated questions, the witch began to think about what made her so angry. Most likely this is due to the fact that the boy had never shown this facial expression to anyone before, which enraged her. When May told Circinia that she was simply jealous of Ben, the girl immediately became very indignant with her. But at the same moment, the girl said that it was clear from Circinia that she liked the Archduke very much. Suddenly, the witch began to invite the girl to go to the market and see new things, thus distracting her from the topic. When May was no longer in the witch's chamber, she thought about why she couldn't refute her words immediately. But she also thought about why she so much wanted Ben to smile so sincerely only at her. Her face continued to turn red during their meetings, even after she rejected the boy, which made the witch feel embarrassed. Even if Circinia wanted to be with Ben, she had already made her decision anyway. As night fell, the witch realized that she had run out of water at the most inopportune moment, and went to get it. But when she returned to her room, she saw Ben standing in front of her, who put his hand on the door. The boy stood carefully in front of her. Looking down and thinking about something, his face looked quite sad. Realizing that it was really Ben, Circinia wondered what he was doing here, because everyone was already asleep. At that moment, the Duke began to say quietly that he was very worried about her, because anything could happen to her. The girl immediately collapsed on the floor and immediately thought about the consequences of what she had done to Ben. A few minutes later, the boy left, thus leaving the girl alone with her thoughts. She realized that she couldn't look him in the eyes and immediately remembered her condition 3 years ago, which was very similar to Ben's condition. Every day, Serisnia waited for the boy to return very soon with his wonderful smile. It was at that moment that the witch began to realize that she was hopelessly in love with the boy. But she rejected him. The next morning, the 3 girls again gathered to go in search of that same place. This time Vern had to go in the opposite direction alone. And Circinia and Mai set off on the path they had invented, noticing every detail of the path. Suddenly May asked the girl if she was okay, which surprised her savior. At the same moment, Circinia reminded the girl of their conversation yesterday, to which May replied that the witch denied everything. When she suddenly told the girl that she was right at that moment, Circinia really loved Ben. Hearing this wonderful news, May immediately rejoiced at being right. But suddenly, the witch confessed to the girl that she had simply rejected Ben recently, which is why they couldn't meet now. She did this so as not to harm Ben himself in any way, because the girl perfectly knew how they lived before. At the same moment, May told the witch that at least once she should try to think only of her feelings. Suddenly, the witch really thought about the fact that she had never thought only of her feelings. She was simply trying to save more people. The only thing she thought about most often was not to hurt Ben, because she felt a lot of pity for the boy. From the moment the girl became Circinia, the only thing she dreamed of was becoming normal and ordinary. The next morning, Ben woke up and began to realize that he had been having very bad nightmares for the umpteenth time. At that moment, Arsons approached, and the Duke asked him to call the doctor to give him a good sleeping pill. Suddenly, the assistant added information to Ben that Circinia had already had breakfast and had gone out for a walk. There was only one thing on the boy's mind. He felt relieved that the girl was still by his side. The Archduke began to suppose that everything that was happening started because of his request. The boy was very upset by his own selfishness, but he was glad to have left the witch at least this way. At that moment, Circinia was again looking for a place where there could be a secret passage. But she couldn't even find anything similar. Suddenly, she realized that most likely the crown prince was simply making a big joke of her. The witch was very displeased because the people's feelings were just a common joke and ordinary for him. At that very moment, she saw a passage she had never seen before, so she decided to see what was there. When she entered this place, her attention was drawn to the fact that it was in this part of the palace where it was very, very dirty. At the end of the hallway, there was a dead end, which Circinia also directed her attention to. Suddenly, a passage incomprehensible to her appeared in front of the girl, so her interest only grew stronger. Behind this passage, there was a staircase leading to a dark basement, the beginning of which was not even visible. At that moment, a maid approached the witch and began to tell her that strangers were not allowed there. After all, this was not a place anyone could go, even if it was very interesting. Suddenly, this maid pushed Circinia into this darkness, which is why the girl couldn't stop herself. She landed at the foot of the stairs. In front of her, she saw a closing door. At that moment, the maid shouted at her that she shouldn't even dare to pass herself off as a lover, because the girl was a stranger to everyone. That's why this dungeon would be the place for her, because here no one would remember her anymore. After a while, the witch stood up and said that pushing people downstairs was tactless and rude, after which she lit a light with her hand to illuminate the way at least a little. Circinia also noticed that it was very cold and damp beneath the mansion, which was unimaginable. She also started thinking why this basement was necessary, because there wasn't even anything here. After some time on the path, the witch saw many cells in front of her, which greatly surprised her. But she immediately realized that this place was a prison, although there was no one here who deserved this punishment. The girl wondered why the crown prince told her about this place. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to a chamber, by whose appearance one could understand that someone had been here recently. After this, the girl noticed some rods hanging on the wall, after which she wondered what they were doing here. The blow of such whips would probably leave the culprits with several elongated scars on their bodies. Suddenly, Circinia remembered Ben's words that he had scars during training. When she realized that Ben had probably been beaten with these rods, she immediately threw them aside in horror. Suddenly, behind her, she heard strange crackles and sounds, which made the girl wary. It turned out that in one of the prison cells, there was a weak and thin man muttering something quietly. The man began to shout that this red hair reminded him very much of Circinia's hair. At the same moment, the witch asked this man how he knew her name, because they had never met before. But he simply continued to say that, most likely, the bastard who caught him also tried to kill the witch this time. After which he explained to the witch what he had so rudely called. It was a half-breed who recently ascended the throne. It turned out that this man was the ex-butler of the family. He was the arms, ears, and legs of the dukedom. At that moment, Circinia remembered that a few days earlier, Burnet had mentioned some things about this man. He was the only butler who worked for the Shorbach family for so long. At that moment, he began to talk about how, when he was still in service, his master had planned his entire future life. But this half-breed appeared. It turned out that the illegitimate Ben somehow harmed his father after his arrival. Ben was simply a sham, living a new and unworthy life, while hiding behind the shadow of his true master. At that moment, Circinia began to threaten Burdick that he shouldn't even dare to insult Ben in any way. After all, someone like this butler would never understand what this guy really went through. At that moment, the man shouted at Circinia that it was Ben who would destroy everything. Because of him, everything would fall apart. Circinia simply began to flee from him as fast as possible so as not to hear these words. After the girl ran upstairs, she was able to destroy the wall blocking the exit to freedom with a single blow. The maid who pushed the witch into that basement was very surprised, after which she immediately began to stop the witch. But instead of a proper answer in her direction, the maid received an angry look and oppression from the girl. When the witch ran a sufficient distance from her, the girl almost cried because she wanted to hear the truth about the guy. She began to run around the entire palace and shout Ben's name so that he would come to her as soon as possible. At that moment, the witch ran into Arsene, who was very surprised by the witch's behavior. Circinia immediately ran up to him and began to ask where Ben was now. When the duke's assistant learned that the girl had just come out of the secret annex, he was very surprised. The witch began to talk about how she literally saw everything that was hidden like that, including the prison. After which she asked Arsene if Ben himself had really been held in this annex before. Suddenly, the assistant asked the girl to accompany him to a less crowded place so that he could discuss everything properly. A few minutes later, the boy and the girl were already at the table, where delicious tea was being served to them. After which, Arsene began to say that Ben was really not the legitimate heir to the throne. In fact, the past Ernjuk previously had a real heir, born to the former duchess. But this child was very sick, so he could not leave his room and meet people. But the previous duke was very selfish. His greatest dream was only the throne, for which he needed someone who had very good strength. That's why he was ready to do whatever this strength required. Even cruel acts. 3 years ago, the duke's envoys had to kidnap Ben in not so good a way, which he of course did not like. According to Duke's past, when the group brought the boy, he was very, very pathetic. But there was no other option. The first order was solely to lock him up in the same annex where Circinia had been. When the order was fulfilled, the boy shouted very loudly to be released and brought back. The guy simply pleaded to be released, because recently he promised Circinia that he would return. After the first 3 days, Ben, exhausted, realized that he couldn't achieve anything that way. That day, Arsene and Ben managed to get to know each other better when he saw that the kidnapped guy hadn't eaten anything. He asked about it. Also that day, the boy learned that Ernjuk Skorbak was his father, which Ben couldn't believe. But despite this, the boy began to ask Arsene to let him out because he didn't need all this life. The boy's head was completely filled with thoughts of Circinia, having been waiting for him all this time. At that moment, Arsene told Ben that if he really wanted to meet her, he would have to obey. It was then that Ben learned that he had a legitimate brother who, unfortunately, was very sick. When he died, Ben would have to live under his name and story, without telling anyone. Ben began to shout and ask if he could really meet Circinia after this. But first of all, Ben needed to take care of his diet and health so as not to die. It was for this reason that the boy began to eat as best he could, but in his head there were only questions about how the girl was doing. Ben also tried to hope that during the whole time he was away, the witch would live a quiet and carefree life. Little by little, he began to train to strengthen his body, but he still hoped that the girl would remember him. His plans were that, when he returned, the girl would light him up with her wonderful and cheerful smile. But he also didn't want to tell the witch what he had been going through all this time. Instead, he was ready to lie. After all, he perfectly understood that if he told the girl things as they are, most likely the girl would be very worried. Mentally, he asked Circinia to wait for him until he returned. After a month in prison, Ben began to ask Arsene when he could leave, to which he calmly replied that he needed a little more time, which annoyed Ben. But the assistant's mind was that he had taken the boy a month ago, but at the same time, he couldn't help him get out of the darkness. Every time he received the same answer. At some point, he could go crazy and start doing terrible things. Every day Ben became more and more aggressive. He began to talk more and more about the fact that he had to leave. The boy gained more and more strength and voice, which would later make it very difficult to stop him.